This is the Literary License Podcast with your hosts, Vicky Ray, John Wilson, and Keith Shorgo. Discussing book to screen and everything in between. Coming at you from the UK and USA.
They keep it real.
Is Elizabeth Collins started in?
Who shall I say is calling?
Barnabas Collins. A cousin from England.
Won't you come in, please?
Thank you.
In 1793, an evil woman named Angelique said with glee, I cast a spell on Barnabas, and what was even worse, she turned him into a vampire. That was his curse.
Barnabas, we must confess, we dig your pearly fangs and your mustang vest. Biting people's backs is your ghoulish desire. Barnabas, your favorite vampire.
Barnabas the vampire doesn't drink or smoke. Not even Bloody Marys, yeah, he'd rather have a Coke. When the night is dark and the moon is full and there's nothing to do, be careful when you walk at night, or he'll put the bite on you.
Barnabas, we must confess, we dig your pearly fangs and your bloodstained vest. Biting people's backs is your ghoulish desire. Barnabas, your favorite vampire.
He finally got fed up as anyone could be. Left a note in blood, said I'm going on TV. Barnabas had flown away to Collinsport in Maine to become the Ed Sullivan of the jugular vein.
Barnabas, we must confess, we dig your pearly fangs and your bloodstained vest. Biting people's backs is your ghoulish desire. Barnabas, your favorite vampire.
Sing my song, boys and ghouls.
We dig your pearly fangs and your bloodstained vest. Biting people's backs is your ghoulish desire. Barnabas, your favorite vampire.
Watch me do my thing.
Barnabas, we must confess, we dig your pearly fangs and your bloodstained vest. Biting people's
Doctor, you're out of your mind.
Then I'll prove it.
All right. Prove it.
I've done a great deal of research on your victims. You have a very destructive cell in your bloodstream. I've isolated it. I've been able to destroy it. I'm convinced that this cell keeps you the way you are. That's right, Barnabas. I can eliminate it. You'll be able to live a perfectly normal life.
Hello, welcome to Literary License Podcast, and today we'll be discussing House of Dark Shadows, the 1970 film directed by Dan Curtis, and Trilogy of Terror, the 1975 TV film directed, of course, by Dan Curtis. This is part of our Out of the Mind of Curtis month. So before we get started, let's find out who's with us. So today we have Tom Diamond. Say hello, Tom.
Hello, everybody. I am very happy to be here as the Dark Shadows co-host, and hope you guys are doing well.
And we also have with us John Wilson, back from a long stint of God knows where the hell he's been. So say hello, John.
Hello, I escaped my confines in Vermont.
And today, Vicky Ray is back home in good old Watertown, New York, or what we like to call Cracktown, USA. And not here with us today. Unfortunately, she's dealing with seeing her family and spending some quality family time. But she will be with us next week for our Rear Windows episode.
We miss you, Vicky. Come back.
Yeah.
Yeah, same here.
I don't miss her because I hear from her about 20 times a day. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm getting used to that too. Yes, to know Vicky is to love her.
So before we get started, let's find out what everyone's been up to. So, John, what have you been up to since last time we've seen you?
I have trying to be reacclimated back into work. You know, when you're on little mini vacays here and there, you tend to move a little bit slower. So, you know, catch up with work and, you know, catching up. I plowed through Stranger Things. Love best season so far of the series. So I have to highly suggest if you haven't watched any of it, catch up now and watch a new season. It's fantastic.
And what about yourself, Tom? What have you been up to?
Well, I am going to be actually taking a trip to New York next Sunday for a few days with my fiance to see a friend who is retiring from his job and attend his party. And I've been tinkering here and there with my voiceover business, and I do want to say, in terms of what we're up to, in terms of the Dark Shadows world, that unfortunately we were hit with the very sad news that Denise Nickerson, who played Amy Jennings, Amy Collins in Parallel Time, and Nora Collins in the 1897 segment, Denise passed away a few days ago. It was very unfortunate. She had a stroke a year ago, and things were never the same since. The fans were always with her, and unfortunately, she had a number of medical complications to which she finally succumbed. I have spoken with Jasmine Nickerson, her daughter, and have conveyed our condolences to her. And Keith, I don't want to step on toes, but I'm sure we all want to express condolences to the family, to Jasmine, who is actually about to give birth to what would have been to her first child. And unfortunately, Denise will never live to see her grandchild. But we do, of course, everybody in the fandom is very saddened. Of course, it's in the media, and she's getting a lot of posthumous praise, which is unbelievable. She was also, of course, Violet Beauregard in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory.
Yeah.
And that is one of her claims to fame.
Yeah.
She got out of acting as an adult and worked in the doctor's office as a receptionist. It's incorrectly reported in the media that she was a nurse, but Jasmine cleared that up for me and for us. Jasmine may down the road, once the dust is settled, interview with us regarding her reminiscences. But of course, that is in the far future, I think, at this point. But that's the main piece of Dark Shadows news, and I am, of course, still doing voiceover. So that's where I am.
And our condolences and prayers are with the Nickerson family at this time. Personally, for myself, I'm in the middle of Stranger Things. I'm very much enjoying that. Still working on my various projects. And I actually sat down and I was hoping to get to bed by 2 o'clock in the morning. But actually, I got to bed about 6 o'clock in the morning because I decided to watch The Act, which is based on D.D. Blanchard and Gypsy Blanchard. Now, if anyone knows about this case, in 2015, a daughter met this boyfriend and they killed the mother. But then it comes to find out that Gypsy Blanchard was a product of Munchausen's by proxy. Her mother would keep her sick, saying that she had leukemia, and give her leukemia treatments and give her cancer treatments and all this other stuff. And there was actually nothing wrong with her. It's just that her mother would make sure that she stayed sick the whole time.
Wow.
Oh, okay.
But The Act, I mean, if anyone's out there, it did air earlier this year. It's going to be winning tons of awards. It stars.
Because Patricia Arquette's in it and Joey King. I love both of them. Oh God, they're amazing. Yeah.
And it's amazing. It's one of those things I think, I'll watch half of it, then I'll go to bed and and then wake up the next day and watch the other half. And I streamed it all the way through because Patricia Arquette, I do rate her as an actress, but now I rate her even a further actress. And I am, let's put it this way. It was so good that I spent all, morning editing the opening and closing credits for the episode today, and adding, putting together the interview and putting, the beginnings and endings to that. And at that whole time, I've been watching nothing but YouTube videos about the actual case. So yeah, I totally got engrossed.
Oh wow, you got hooked.
I got hooked. So anyone out there, it is available on Hulu on streaming, and I believe you can also get it on Stars through the Amazon subscription as part of their Prime. So, but I highly do that. And then, of course, life wouldn't be complete without my trashy television. So we getting ready for the reunion of, the Real Housewives of Beverly Hills to find out about Puppygate. And, of course, we watched Real Housewives of New York City, which we got into. And I actually binge watched Yummy Mummies, which is an Australian
on Netflix, right?
On Netflix, yes, about these 3 rich Australian women who are pregnant, have babies. And to be honest, I binge watched it. It took me like 2 days. I couldn't stop watching it. So yeah. So I've had my bit of trash at the same time.
Someone needs to make a Real Housewives of Housewives and make it all about lesbians living.
Hey,
that would be a fun show.
Yeah, catch up with that, Bravo. That's the next show for you all.
Yeah, it's only a matter of time.
Well, since we're talking about stuff like that, I might as well put in, I recently watched the first season of the revamped Lost in Space on Netflix, and I was absolutely shocked. I mean, it is great. I mean, it is. When I'm a Star Trek person, so when I think of the original Lost in Space, I go, ugh, with the exception of course, Dr. Smith. Oh, the pain, William. And you catch his clump, punch his booby, and stuff like that. Jonathan Harris was a joy, but this Lost in Space really it's a darker thing, but it's got a lot of good stuff, a lot of good interaction between the characters. It's coming back for a second season, and frankly, I can't wait. Yeah.
I love Parker Posey too, because she's just fabulous, pretty much in anything.
She's very good. I actually also watched Tales of the City, the new series of that on Netflix, which I really enjoyed. So.
That's actually I was waiting for them to put the original series, and they just put that on. So I'm going to watch that, and then I'll watch the new ones because I wanted to kind of catch up.
The only problem you're going to have with the new one compared to the original is that the original is set in the 70s. Because it's set when it was actually written, and then unfortunately, with the new series, they kind of moved it 20 years in advance, so it's set now, but it doesn't really link up because when this original miniseries did happen, it happened in the 90s, late 80s, early 90s. Yeah. And so 20 years from that, but they're doing like 20 years after the books. So it's kind of like, it should actually be set in the 80s.
Yeah.
90s, but it's set today. So the timelines are a bit mixed up, but it's brilliant. I highly suggest it. It was great.
2 other good series that, of course, they stopped producing, but the Strain, which I watched a few months ago and which I thought was absolutely fantastic. And also Sleepy Hollow, which I've started to watch, which also I think has a lot of. So and from out of nowhere, I'm watching The Many Loves of Dobie Gillis from the 1960s, which is unbelievable, and it's a very smart show. It really is. I mean, they rattle lines off at each other, and it's just very, 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 very unusual, I think, and. So that just goes to show you that I'm not just a horror nut.
The other show I'm continuing to watch because second season of Pose, holy shitballs! It is just so well written. Like the last episode, I was sitting in my living room, getting ready to go to work, crying, sobbing, going, "This show, it's just destroying me." I was like crying.
Was that about Candy?
Yes, not to give anything away. Someone online gave it away, and I was like, really? You could have not said something, so I don't want to give anything away, but it was a very well-written episode and just very smart. It's just such a smart show.
Yeah, it was very well handled. Yeah, thank you for that. John got me into that, so I've been watching that. And Ink Masters, of course. Ink Masters is back. Yes.
Oh.
So this actually brings us to a brief history of the House of Dark Shadows. Now, the brief House of Dark Shadows is a 1970 American feature-length horror film, which was directed by Dan Curtis. It was based on his Dark Shadows television series, which, for those people out there who don't know about it, Dark Shadows was a soap opera that ran from 1966 to 1971, hitting its heyday between 1967 to 1969. In this film expansion, the vampire Barnabas Collins, played by Jonathan Frid, searches for a cure for vampirism so he can marry a woman who resembles his long-lost fiancée, Zozette, played by Kathryn Leigh Scott. Now, the filming took place at Lyndhurst Estate in Tarrytown, New York, and additional footage of it was filmed at Sleepy Hollow Cemetery. Curtis would then, of course, follow this film 1 year later with Night of Dark Shadows to mixed reviews, I guess we could call it, which is another expansion of the Shadows franchise, which was dealing with the witch Angelique, which would be played by Laura Parker. So, Tom, what do you have about the making of House of Dark Shadows? Anything to add?
Oh, yeah, sure. Well, plenty of things. But one thing that really comes to mind, and it's a true story, for those fans who have actually seen the film will remember the cemetery scene. In this film, Karlen, who's played by Nancy Barrett, Karlen Stoddard, Karlen Stoddard was turned into a vampire in the film, which she never was in the original show. So everybody was like, wow, let's see what Nancy Barrett looks like with fangs and all kinds of stuff. And so Barnabas, of course, has an attraction to Karlen purely from I need you standpoint. And so the funeral was held in the funeral in the cemetery scene in the rain, with everybody standing around in the rain. It appears that there was a gravediggers strike at the time. And so because there was a gravediggers strike, they were actually putting cadavers in one of the buildings that Dan Curtis needed to shoot the scene. So they had hired non-union workers to get rid of the bodies, and apparently it wasn't happening fast enough. And Curtis said, come on, guys, can you get rid of these bodies already? We got to use this building. We got to shoot this scene. So you can just imagine them trudging all the bodies out of a really macabre set-off, I think. But anyway, and that's one of a number of funny stories. The budget on the film was $750,000, which was twice what Hammer Films used to shoot their Christopher Lee stuff at the time, but it was a fraction of the cost of of stuff like Rosemary's Baby and other horror films at the time that the other major studios shot. For some crazy reason, ABC did not want to sponsor the movie. They had actually suggested to Dan Curtis that he do a complete revamp with a new cast. And Dan Curtis said, no, I want to do the original. And he shopped around. And finally, MGM, of course, who made the movie, Jim Aubrey, had just become president of MGM at the time. And I guess he was a Dark Shadows fan. And he said, well, let's just go with it. The film saved the studio from bankruptcy at that particular time, and it was certainly a big hit. The film was a 5-week shoot at Lyndhurst, and then they also went to, I think, Connecticut to film The Old House and a couple of other mansions. And while this was happening, the series was in what we call parallel time, parallel time 1970. And essentially what they did to Barnabas, so Jonathan could go up there, was to put him to chain him in a coffin for 5 weeks. And Laura Parker and David Selby held down the fort as Quentin Collins and Alexis Angelique at that time, while the rest of the cast could go up and shoot. Fans would somehow came onto the set waiting for Barnabas, and there he is, and stuff like that. So there are a number of, there are other things we can talk about, but I think that gives you a bird's eye view of the film and the logistics involved.
And what about yourself, John? Do you have anything to add about the making of House of Dark Shadows?
I thought it was interesting. I read that the producer Dan Curtis wanted to use or piece together edited footage from the series and build a film out of that, and then they quickly kind of abandoned that concept because of, I guess, a lot of the actors coming going, leaving, the different parallel timelines, so that type of situation. But I thought that was interesting. It'd be almost kind of like a compilation of all these different episodes in one movie. I wonder why he originally had that concept. I don't know if it was like a matter of like, we would pull something together because we think that sort of shined and maybe produce a film out. But that was interesting to me.
I also want to state now, Keith, the film actually 20 minutes was taken out of the film, and although my understanding is that MGM did not pressure Curtis to edit this particular film. He did pressure Curtis to edit Night of Dark Shadows, which the fans are in anguish about because Night has not been restored yet. But as a result, there were now the House of Dark Shadows adaptation for the book, which was written by Dan Ross under the pen name of Marilyn Ross, actually has the abbreviated scenes. So one of the biggest abbreviated scenes was that they actually had David, played by David Hennessy, hanging in a closet, and Maggie was supposed to find him there. And that was a 4-minute scene, and Dan Curtis, who directed the film, took it out because he felt that was just going to get too many people, too many mothers upset, and to just be too offensive for the screen. Also stuff that was taken out very briefly. And by the way, in advance, I want to thank fan David Mock, who helped me out in researching this, who's a great guy. But you have stuff very briefly like an argument between Maggie and Kathryn Leigh Scott, who plays Maggie, the reincarnation of Josette, and Roger Davis, who plays Jeff Clark, in the stable. There's a scene between David Hennessy and Roger Davis at a costume party, which you will see in the film, which has actually a revamp of a costume party that was done during the original series. The Roger and the sheriff discovering Carolyn's empty coffin. Little things like this. One of the things that was never really established in the film is that the sheriff and all the police believed that Barnabas was a vampire, and I should say that Karlen was a vampire, and it was never brought out in the film. How were the police convinced? All of a sudden it was just like something that was accepted. Also, Willie, there's this great scene where Barnabas beats Willie with a cane because he feels that Willie has betrayed him regarding Professor Stokes, played by Thayer David, who is apprised of the fact that Barnabas is a vampire and Barnabas has been causing all this stuff. But it was never established in the film as to why Willie, as to how Barnabas found this out. Just Barnabas comes in and starts beating him like crazy, and then yells Julia to the heavens. It would be nice. I don't know if this cutting room stuff was ever found, but it would be nice if it were added onto the film. The film ran a total of 97 minutes. I think with the 20 minutes more, it would have been under a little over 2 hours, or under 2 hours. So those are other things.
So what we're going to do is we're going to cut to a commercial break and the trailer for House of Dark Shadows, and we'll be back with you after a word from our sponsor.
Amazon is here to make your life easier. By just the tap of a button, you can turn the camera on your phone to your own personal shopping list. Introducing Flow. Just tap the camera icon onto the search bar, and you can find whatever it is you're looking for, right on Amazon. Faster than scanning a barcode and typing the name of your item into the search engine. Besides, Searching with words is so 2012. Save time and money. Amazon, where shopping meets effortless.
House of Dark Shadows, where death is a way of life.
Good evening. I'm Barnabas Collins.
If I didn't see you with my own eyes, I wouldn't believe it.
Barnabas Collins, head of a family of blood relations.
Julia, do you believe in the existence of vampires?
You're not really serious.
But he is, Julia. Karlen didn't believe in vampires either. Now she is one.
Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me.
Stay away from me! You're dead!
Barnabas Collins, vampire, takes a bride in a bizarre act of unnatural love. Come and see how the vampires do it. House of Dark Shadows. Nobody lives there.
We are one planet. We share one extraordinary home. We are millions of wonders, but we are all one world. If we only get one chance to save our planet, to protect it for the next generation, then we have to take it. This is our chance. This is our fight. For our planet, for our home, for all of us. Join WWF today.
Hello, welcome back to the Literary License Podcast, and we're discussing House of Dark Shadows, directed by Dan Curtis in 1970. So, Tom, what are your thoughts about the film House of Dark Shadows?
Well, I, as a Dark Shadows fan, obviously, I was watching Dark Shadows back then when I was a callow youth, and I must have been around 15 or 16 at the time. I could not wait for it to come into the theaters. I liked it. Basically, I think that the decision to include Robert Cobert's signature music on the series, and it was basically duplicated in the film, was absolutely the right decision. Robert Cobert, as a matter of fact, from what I understand, wanted to compose new music for the movie, but Dan Curtis insisted that the old music be used, and I think that was great because that immediately had Dark Shadows TV fans connect with the film because of that. And I think the music was edited well, with the exception of certain points in the film. And one kind of wonders about some of the editing process that went into it. And I think once again, because he probably was on it. Curtis was probably on the deadline. Because, as I said, the film was shot in 5 weeks, and then there was probably a deadline for post-production. So certain cuts appear to have been, it looks a little choppy. But if you can get beyond that, and certainly the fans, I think, got beyond that because they knew the plot essentially, so they were able to connect what they saw in the TV show with what was going on and connect the dots. The best scene, I thought of course, no one liked to have seen Barnabas staked, but he gets it in the movie from Roger Davis, who played Jeff Clark, and I think there was a very operatic ending to that, to the movie, and then of course when you see the bat flying out at the end, you were hoping, well, wow, there's going to be a sequel, and unfortunately, Jonathan did not want to reprise his role in the sequel, but it was talked about that had there been a sequel with Jonathan, it would have comprised the 1795 storyline as to how he became a vampire, and then Laura Parker would have been there as Angelique. So my film was that it was, and it got mixed reviews. A New York Times review couldn't understand it. It was very obvious if you saw reviews from people who did not know what Dark Shadows was about. So they completely put it down as, oh, it's another trashy horror film, which back in the 60s, horror films were like looked down upon by a lot of critics. But it did get. They couldn't deny that it was a critical success in terms of money, and that obviously prompted the studio did want to do a sequel. So my opinion was that, and it was also the first time a movie had been done from a TV soap opera, first ever, and that was a breakthrough. And if you want to call Dark Shadows a soap opera, because some people will say it really wasn't. Soap operas at the time, of course, boy meets girl, boy marries girl, boy gets girl pregnant, etc. Dark Shadows was boy meets girl, boy bites girl, boy turns girl into vampire, girl goes back to werewolf. So in that, obviously, it was very, very different. But it was still, for that kind of, it was in the afternoon, it was in the daytime, and it made it to a movie. First time ever. So I liked it.
So we have Rod Laby, who's joined us. So Rod, what are your thoughts about the film House of Dark Shadows?
Well, I agree with what Tom has said. I was also an original watcher of Dark Shadows, viewer of Dark Shadows. I was about that age at that time. And while the show was going on, when the movie came out, I think the movie came out in like the fall of 1970, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
And it did? Okay. And I remember looking forward to it. I had read about it in the fan press. And when I say the fan press, that was newsletters from kids my age who had homegrown fan clubs for these people. And so I was pumped for this. I knew it was going to be good. But I think the difference between this movie and, let's say, the Dark Shadows movie made with Johnny Depp is that the majority of the people who probably attended the viewings of the first film were already watchers of the show. Mm-hmm. We didn't need a lot of backstory because we already knew who Barnabas was. We knew who all those characters were, basically, except for Sheriff Patterson, who was now played by Dennis Patrick. Mm-hmm. And but when it came time for Tim Burton's Dark Shadows, nobody knew who that was anymore. The older fans were in the minority, and the newer viewers, I won't call them fans, didn't understand what the hell this was all about. What is this? It's stupid. It doesn't make any sense. But the first one, to me, made sense. And what appealed to me about it the most is that during the daily shows, Jonathan Frid, or Barnabas, I should say, and Dr. Julia Hoffman, and I've said this before, were like a Sherlock Holmes and a Watson. They were always trying to figure something out, or to rectify some wrong, or to uncover a mystery. So for Barnabas to revert back to his vicious self, which he was when I first started watching, and he never was, rehabilitated, so to speak, by the end of the film. He stayed evil right to the very end. So you wanted to see him die. And as Tom said, it was very operatic. I mean, it was here it was in slow motion, And when I talked to Roger, I interviewed Roger, and I said, that staking looked very real. And he said that he had spoken with Dan Curtis, and Dan Curtis said, how do you want to do it?
Well, actually, let me stop you for a minute, Rod, because we have an interview with Roger Davis coming up.
I don't want to repeat that then.
Right, exactly. And he described that in very good detail, so I'm sure the fans are going to be looking forward to that. But you bring up an excellent point in that the fans really were able, as I said before, to connect the dots. I want to before I forget, I do want to make I want to acknowledge Dick Smith's role. Dick Smith was the makeup artist, may he rest in peace.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think he's around. And he did the makeup for Barnabas aging to his full 165 or so years. And that, the bald pate was actually patterned after the thing that he did for Dustin Hoffman in Little Big Man. There was some veiny, adding to the face and everything else to the age, but it was so realistic that apparently the housekeepers of the Lyndhurst estate were assigned to were assigned to help the cast and the crew. One of them, having no knowledge of Dark Shadows, I think, ran into Jonathan with the makeup, and she screamed so loud that the chandeliers in the room started shaking, according to so it was very, very realistic. But I agree with you. I think that it was Dan Curtis gave what the fans wanted. However, Jonathan, as you probably know, was not happy with the fact that he had to play a more traditional vampire in the movie. He had, of course, focused on the reluctant vampire of Dark Shadows, who was very guilty about what he did, had a lot of angst, he was able to emote, but Curtis did not want him to do that. And Jonathan did what he could to kind of, at certain scenes in the movie, he turned his head to you got there's Barnabas, he's guilty. But that didn't happen too often because Dan Curtis wouldn't allow it. And it would have been very interesting, I think, to see what might have happened had Jonathan been allowed to play that more sympathetic role.
Well, I'm going to actually put a spanner in the works because personally, for this film, I think this film is badly made. I'm sorry.
I'm going to have to be the mixed critic as well, so I'm going to have to be as well.
There are critics who agree with you, by the way, Keith.
But let me give you the reasons for this. Now the thing is,
I'll follow Keith if he doesn't mention some of the stuff that I caught as well.
Now the thing is, if you're a fan of the series, fine. This is like a Stars on 45 or a Hooked on Classics, minus the hand clapping of the best moments of the TV series. And the thing is, and I just think that personally, they should have paid more attention to the script. The script is patchy. Basically, we get it is like the greatest hits of what's happened. There's no character development. And I mean, if you're familiar with the show, you're fine. If you're not familiar with the show, you're going to be completely lost.
Yeah.
The editing is probably the worst editing I've seen in the film.
Absolutely.
But what I will give to it, I think that the performances by Jonathan Frid and Grayson Hall and Kathryn Leigh Scott and the rest of them is very, very good.
Yeah.
And the thing that makes the film watchable is basically the cinematography, and that's Arthur Ornitz. I have to my hats off to him because the film looks beautiful. It's a beautiful film to look at.
Yeah.
But I mean, besides stealing from Bram Stoker for every chance they could get, there wasn't a lot of development. And I do think that if they paid a bit more attention to the script and developed a full story, maybe cut off him, Julia Hoffman trying to cure him or something like this, and maybe develop the script a bit better, it wouldn't felt like a greatest hits medley. And that's what it felt like.
I agree, and I think part of it is it's bravo for the studio to produce something in line with the series that's still currently on. That is like a original, back in the 70s. That's like a first transmedia piece where they were listening to their fan base and saying, "We're going to give you what you want." Unfortunately, I've never watched one episode of Dark Shadow, so I'm going to be that person who's never ever seen a single episode, right? And It's not because I don't want to. It's just literally like to catch up on 1 million plus episodes is going to kill me. Maybe turn me back into a vampire. But anyways, I digress. So it's pretty much from the perspective I'm watching the story that is playing out. And one of the first things I noticed is like Barnabas has been trapped. I would be a little bit pissed off. I would be a little bit like, I'm coming back out of this. I'm going to find out what happened or what's going on. They kind of skip over that. And I'm like, okay. Then it's like the family, Barnabas he's kind of luring with the family, and then he's falling for this love, and so I'm getting all that. But there's just scenes like Keith was saying, the editing was so bad that we're in the emotions of a scene where someone's getting bit, someone's getting stabbed, someone's getting beaten, and then it gets cut so quickly that it doesn't even finish the scene, and you're now in a room with people talking. You're like, what the hell just happened? Well, that was so jarring that I'm like, what just happened right now? And I'm like, and I think that you have to take note. A film is different from a sitcom. You can do that, or a soap opera. You can do that in a soap opera. You cannot do that in a film.
Well, I think also you have to, so there are a couple of things. Again, 20 minutes or 22 minutes were taken out of the film. And that, I think, was very unfortunate. The same thing happened with The Night of Dark Shadows, where almost a half an hour was taken out of the film. Now, once again, Night of Dark Shadows, Curtis had to do it because there was a studio constraint. But and Rod, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe there was any kind of a constraint on the part of the studio to cut stuff from the first film. So I'm at a loss to understand why he did that.
I think it's because Dan Curtis wasn't a director. He's not a director.
Yeah, it was his first attempt. It was his first attempt. It was his first attempt,
and I think that. And as far as the editing goes, okay, I do understand that things have to be edited out of the film. And I think that a worthy director can cut things out of the film. And the thing is, you don't realize they've been cut out. And you don't
exactly.
Yeah. And the thing is, we got edits basically where lines are cut off. It'd be like, oh my. And it's like,
yeah, exactly.
What?
Yeah.
Well, I was like, what has he done here? And I mean, and we all understand. I mean, Dan Curtis, as far as producing and stuff like this, and we, Vicky and I covered Burnt Offerings, and there's a lot of problems with that film as well. Mm-hmm. So it seemed to me, I mean, even with the title screens, it did. I mean, if you didn't know any better, House of Dark Shadows looks like a TV movie, and Burnt Offerings looks like a TV movie, and they're not the theatrical films. I'm just talking from like the opening titles sequences. But saying that, but we do know things that we do know about Dan Curtis, that he was a bit of a megalomaniac when it came to things. There's long history, and this is no disrespect for him, because him being a megalomaniac is the reason why we got things like Dark Shadows. It's the reason why we got this, the multiple TV adaptations of classic Gothic novels, which he done very, very well with. And also is the reason why we got War and Remembrance and things like this, because of his megalomanianism. But I think here in House of Dark Shadows, this is where the megalomaniac, unfortunately, keeps him from producing a quality film, because all the elements are there. The script, I think that maybe not using Sam Hall, maybe not so much in the script, and maybe looking at someone who's more familiar writing theatrical films might have helped a little bit here. But I do think that maybe if he listened to reason, if he listens maybe to the editor, and he listens to people who can actually formulate the script and have some people behind him that would give him more of an understanding, this has the ingredients of being a great film, but it doesn't really deliver on it being a great film. And I think this is probably one of the reasons why Dark Shadows started going in decline, because here we got a story of Barnabas, which is fine, which is a story that happened 2 years ago on the soap opera. And for fans, it's fantastic because you can fill in all the blanks, which is good. And I know it's quite good to see like the grand settings and the grand sceneries and that's what makes this film for the fans. Unfortunately, if you weren't a fan and you watch this film, let's say that you did like the film, and then you go into the series, you're not going to get that, unfortunately, because of the story and the way everything's done.
Well, that's why I think it's unfortunate that Curtis did not want to use the reluctant vampire for Jonathan. I think that would have added a great deal of dimension to the film for people who had never watched Dark Shadows before, and therefore were not acquainted with this new concept of this particular type of I'm so guilty about what I did, and that they could identify with more than what Curtis wanted to. Curtis was very into traditional horror, and everything was an homage to, and he stole from everything, but everything was an homage to that. So he really wanted Frid to be more like Bela Lugosi, only added with the blood and with all the and with all the stuff that they could not do on the show due to the fact they didn't have enough money, and then also without the censors who were on their back. And it was the 1970, and vampire films at that point with the gory stuff were just getting into just hitting their own, particularly due to Hammer. And so I think Curtis wanted to combine traditional Dracula with that, but you just didn't. I could not see Barnabas as just except the way he was in the beginning, because they had to establish that in the beginning in the show, where he was literally out of his element and he literally needed blood to survive. So I think that those were the two. You hit upon the point, Keith, that if you were a fan, you were going to love this movie. And as I said before, that if you were not a fan, you were going to have a difficult time understanding it. And I think that Frid's, if Frid had been allowed to interpret the role the way he wanted to, I think it would have made a difference.
Yeah, I mean, I think his, motivation is a very important, critical thing for a movie and for characters. And I've really felt that, Barnabas's character, emotionally wise, for someone who's been alive for 165 years, like that. Yeah. So however long he was alive, I feel like he was a little bit pendulum. Like he would be fine and then not fine and fine and then not fine. And then there was the motivation of he didn't have a motivation until he saw his reincarnated great love. And then there's motivation there. Right. But even then, when the doctor, when Julie was trying to cure him, it was one of these things where it's like she had motivation. She clearly was in love with him, or she clearly had feelings for him, and she wanted to help him. And he kind of was like, "Great, I'm gonna let you help me." And then when it sort of fails, he literally kills her. And I'm like, what? I'm like, maybe you need to have a caveat there. If it doesn't work, I'm going to kill you, bitch. Like, literally, it's like she was just like, hey, I'm going to help you because I know there's goodness in you or something. Like, it was just weird to me. Like, again,
Yeah.
Well, not to interrupt you, but if I remember rightly, Tom, you can correct me if you can, if you will. On the original show, when she cured him, that went on for quite a long time, if I remember rightly. And also, when he turned old, when he turned his complete age, that was because he wanted double doses on the show. Right. He wanted it to hurry up. Yeah. But in the movie, she did it to get revenge on him because he didn't love her. And she knew that because he was going to give the music box to Maggie. And when she figured that out, she figured she'd kill him. She couldn't. Yeah, but I can't have you, nobody will.
I don't think it was ever like I did this. Like he just looked at her and she looked at him and he got it on the look. So there wasn't like I can't.
Well, she was packing. That helped.
No, but I mean, if I can't have you, no one can. Like, I mean, that would have been like, oh shit, kill her.
And there's also yet another edited scene out of the film concerned the fact that when Julia and Barnabas were talking and they started to develop this friendship with each other, and again, that's a scene I would have liked to have seen in the show that is much more fleshed out, where Julia is the sacrificial lamb in the original show to the love that she has for Barnabas. And it points to the fact that Julia has a low self-esteem, but Julia in the original show is not an evil character. In the movie, they made a vengeful woman scorned character out of her, and that may very well. But once again, if that edited scene had been in, we might have had more of an insight into what.
I think where they basically went wrong is that maybe they should have just used the 1790 storyline and used that as the film basis, because what you had at that time is that you had a pure, simple story. And basically it's like the Collins family moves to Maine. You have the unquiet love at Angelique. You have the curse and his undying love for Josette, and then they kind of die one by one.
It would have been beautiful.
Until Barnabas gets buried. But I do think that the reason why they probably picked this basically is that, Hammer was at the height of horror at the moment. And I think if we emulate this, then we'll put it into a modern setting, and this will be great. But as I said before, this film could have been great we'd have to slice through a lot of these not obsolete storylines that you don't really need.
Yeah.
You have the Fair doing his George Saunders doing Van Hassling thing going on at the moment. You have,
yeah.
And which is fine. You have the multiple storylines. I mean, Don Briscoe, though he's very sexy in his Mike Brady pajamas.
Yeah.
But there. All these stories, because the cast is so large, and I understand what they're doing. Is they're this is for the Dark Shadows fans. Going to throw all our characters in here.
We're going to put them in, yeah.
Put in characters in bit roles, like Jerry Lacey as the minister at the funeral. And I think they had Chris Pennock actually as one of the pallbearers. And Michael Stroker was carrying the coffin. Michael Stroker being Aristide, Chris Pennock being Jevons, et cetera, et cetera. So and of course, they all wanted to give these people, put them in the film, give them a little money, and in the meantime, the characters can see, the fans can see who they are.
One of the things I laughed too is, when who's the one that dies and comes back as a vampire, the stalker. I call her the stalker because, quite literally, she's like, "I love you. Why won't you love me?" But when she dies, right, and then they have the whole funeral, and then she comes back, and then it's like, and we're gonna have another funeral again. It's like, the hell?
There's another scene, her going after David in the pool scene. The little kid. Now, the idea of a woman.
That was a great scene, by the way. I did like that one.
Yeah, that scene was actually good. That was well done.
Which Curtis cut because she was actually going to bare her fangs and attack him, and then Curtis cut that part out. But that reminds me of the Hammer Vampire Circus, which came along. I think it was a couple of years later, where they actually have the vampires biting kids. And they actually went forward with that. But there were, another thing, this thing of Barnabas being chained in the coffin, never really explained in the movie. Yeah. And again, you had to be a fan to understand that there was a whole wonderful plot line about the fact that, and Barnabas does in the movie say, well, when my father chained me, it was like a sentence. But you don't have no idea, if you're not a fan, as to the whole pathos between Joshua Collins, played by Louis Edmonds, and Barnabas as the son, because in the show they always had father-son problems. But then Joshua has to deal with the fact that his son is now a vampire, and he has to destroy him. But he's not somebody who wants to kill his own son, but he feels that as the head of the family, he's got to do something like this. And then finally, the chaining is happened.
And a cross on the inside of the coffin.
Well, yeah. I think I would be a little bit more pissed that I was chained up for however long. I don't know how many years he was in that coffin, but I would come out a little raging. I'm just saying, I would not be a happy man person.
But that's you. But you have to understand the character of Jonathan, who was Barnabas in the original show, was basically in 1795. He was spoiled. He was going into his father's business, but he didn't really have that much of the way of the world. And now all of a sudden, he's he's in the original show he is pissed actually when he comes out, and that's one of the reasons that he goes on an attacking rampage, because he's projecting. And he's, aside from the fact that he needs blood, he's really pissed off at the whole circumstances of events that have changed his life. And in the original show, actually, there's some great conversations with Thayer David as Ben Stokes, the servant, where he talks to him about that. So there's so much in the original show that, and of course, you've got a movie, and you can't have. Some people have suggested this should have been a 3-hour movie.
I still think with it being a 3-hour movie, I don't think you're going to. With everything that they put in this film, that they were making you unpack, this would have to actually be 5 2-hour movies to get all the storylines that they're trying to pack into this.
You couldn't get all the storylines.
I'm also surprised. I feel like this now it has been done where in line with something that's a series, there's a movie that comes out, but they do a good job making it sort of an adjunct to what's currently going on, right? So take the storyline that you're writing as a series and say,
and move it
wow,
forward.
how can we make this a theatrical thing, right? And blow this out and then bring the fans back to TV, right? So now, oh my God, these big events happen. All these really big, huge things happen to these characters. But now if you want to know what happens, now you have to tune in. Like you have to come back to TV now. Like that's where the mistake is. And I think it's like you're trying to retell something, but you're not really retelling something. You're kind of like taking moments of times throughout in a series and like tying it all together and throwing it all together and hodgepodging it. And that's going to, from a fan's perspective, I'd be a little bit pissed because that would be like me watching Harry Potter, for example, and then just dumping everything into one movie and being like, what? Like, no, like this doesn't make sense. Like certain things are here and certain things are there. And it's like, it's again, to me, I think it wasn't confusing. The story was very simple in my mind. It was just that I didn't believe the motivation of a lot of the characters. The only one I really believed the motivation for was Julia. Like, I mean, her motivation was clear, very clear.
But I also I think that comes from Julia or Grayson Hall being an incredible actress. Because
she is a great actress.
She wears her motivation on her face. You know,
remember, she was an Oscar nominee for her performance in Night of the Iguana in 1964. This was someone who had she had a good film background. She had a good stage background. On TV, it was felt that at certain times her performance was over the top because she wasn't used to that medium. But there is no doubt, give her credit for what it's due. On stage and on screen, she was excellent, especially as epitomized in the House of Dark Shadows film.
Well, I'd say next to Jonathan Frid, she's probably the most popular performer on the show, wouldn't you say?
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
I mean, definitely.
Well, I don't know about the most. You mean on the movie or in the show?
In the show.
Well, you gotta, there. I think you're gonna have fans saying, "Well, they loved Angelique. Angelique, they felt was the most popular one."
Well, Angelique was good. Yes, Angelique was good.
And Kathryn Leigh Scott as Josette, because that was all part of the triangle. But Julia was special on the show because Julia had the unrequited love affair with him, and I think a lot of adolescents who were watching the show at the time identified with that. In addition to the Barnabas thing of I'm in a place and I don't know where I am and how am I going to survive in this kind of thing.
Does anyone know? I mean, I know that Rod and Tom, you both have done quite a bit of research into this film. Do we know why every time they showed Joan Bennett, they Vaseline the lens and showed her in soft focus? I mean, it was like watching.
I agree. I was like, what is going on here? Someone either got a really infatuation here and like,
They were like Vaseline skin. The thing is that she was still very beautiful. I mean, she would go on to do Suspiria that we did cover this year.
Maybe it was in her contract.
And it was very beautiful in that, and it's like she's not soft focused at all. And here she's like, every time they showed her, she was like soft focus. It was like, but it did remind me of Lucille Ball in Maine because if you ever seen Lucille Maine, and every time it was Lucille Ball, she'd be like soft focus. You're like, what? And it was kind of a bit jarring. It's just like, okay, why?
Well, the other thing with I don't think they did enough with the Joan Bennett character in the movie. I think they could have fleshed that out a little more because after a while she's just sitting in the room saying nothing as a result of all this stuff, and she became catatonic. And I mean, now in the show, she went through periods where, because she was under a special contract and she got a lot of good vacations, so they killed her. So they put her character in a coffin. She was dead when in fact she was alive, and so they put her character in a coffin at one point while she went on her Europe vacations. But I don't think that they again, they had, the central focus, of course, was Frid and Kathryn Leigh Scott, and they made Roger Davis the protagonist, which in the interview with him you'll see. But they could have done a little more with her. But then again, this is Monday morning quarterbacking.
I do think.
Well, she does come in after she's catatonic. When Maggie is bitten by the older Barnabas, Maggie screams and she comes in.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah.
Elizabeth, and she screams. That's the last time you see her. But
Yeah.
I do agree with Keith, and as I've been thinking about it, and I don't know why I never thought about this before, it would actually have worked better if it started in 1795, went through the entire history or story of Barnabas, and then it ends in the present day with Willie trying to unchain the coffin, because by now everybody knows what's in that coffin
And then you could
why
have
it's chained.
And then you could have had a sequel. But once again,
Yeah, then you could have a sequel. It could be this one, House of Dark Shadows.
but again, Frid did not want to do a second movie. Maybe it was because of the way it was handled. I personally think, okay, 3-hour movie, that is a lot for people who are not fans to see. The fans would have loved it. But I think that something where you could have gone into the 1795 at first, and then for the first hour and a half, then take an intermission, and then have the present day thing, and then have it end the way it ended. That would have,
to be honest, the best part of the Barnabas storyline anyway is that, okay, when Barnabas first appears in the soap opera, okay, it is interesting, it's fine, it's good, but the series really comes alive when it goes back in time. And then the origin story of Barnabas is a lot more exciting. It has all the emotion, it has lots of heart, it has a lot of horror. You have the whole gothic thing tying in with everything together, and you have good relationships. And the thing is, if they did start at 1797, you could tell that story in 92 minutes, really, because and without actually cutting out anything.
Okay.
Here, I think, because it's set in modern time, and because we are dealing with writers who are scrambling, trying to figure out where they're going to go with this Barnabas character, which, being on Serial, I mean, that's what they did, sort of thing. They're producing, 5 shows a week, 25 minutes a pop, and basically, and they're writing, and making sure that the story is moving forward, but at the same time, throwing as many things at it, because they know if it doesn't work, they can always switch to storylines or drop storylines altogether, which when we do cover Dark Shadows, the TV series, we'll actually realize how many storylines actually get dropped when we get to that.
Well, again, remember also that the show was still going on at that time, and they had a logistical nightmare in terms of getting cast members up there while they were still having, where they were still shooting the regular show during the day. That's why they kept Lara Parker, who was, I always have to remember to pronounce her name, Laura. My Brooklyn accent gives me Lara, but it's really that. And she was an integral part of the parallel time storyline.
And Selby too.
Well, Selby also, but Selby, they did not need Selby for the 1795 plot. But they would have needed Lara Parker for the 1795 plot, and they couldn't spare her. Because,
well, to be honest, they actually probably could have spared her. If they went to the 1795 thing, first of all, you can cut out the whole Victoria Winters storyline that would appear, so you can cut that out.
Yeah.
Because no one's going back in time. And that was, some of the storylines. And the thing is that you probably could, yes, you might need Laura, or, sort of thing. But the thing is, if with a little bit of planning, you could always bring Diane Millay back, and she can do another Phoenix storyline or whatever, or make her character a little bit more.
That's possible. I don't know what the situation was.
There's a lot of things. There's a lot of things they could have done, sort of thing. And because the whole thing is that, okay, yeah, you're gonna be without Barnabas, but at the same time, that 1795 is that you're kind of developing your characters and stuff like this, and a lot of these characters could probably just jump back into the show quite easily, so you wouldn't actually kind of miss them.
I think they were most comfortable with the way that film went, because if you remember now, the 91 revival with Ben Cross was essentially the same rehash of the 17, although they went back into 1795 in the revival, but once again, rather than develop new stuff, they wanted to rely on what they had, because they were Dan Curtis was most comfortable with it. He felt, well, this is what, and again, they're looking to make money. So are they going to sacrifice art for the financial demon? And that may have been a factor as well.
I do think that it's quite interesting that Daphne, who no one even knew who the hell she was until this movie, is wearing red. So you knew that she was expendable, like a Star Trek episode. Oh my gosh, she's wearing red. She's going to get it.
That was Lisa Richards, actually, who played that. That was completely new because Daphne in the series was Kate Jackson, and that was later on.
But I'm saying, but the thing is, she's wearing a red dress, and once I saw her, it's like, oh, she's gonna die because she's wearing red. And in Star Trek, whenever the person that you never seen anything before was wearing a red shirt, they were the ones who were gonna die.
Oh, that's interesting. That's fun.
I never figured that out while I was watching the show originally. Isn't that funny? It wasn't until later on when people. But I should say that the original part of Daphne was written for Marie Wallace, and she was supposed to be an art dealer who came to visit Collinwood to try to sell some paintings to Mrs. Stoddard. And she was attacked on her way back to her car, but she couldn't do it because she had signed on with another soap opera at that time, Somerset, I think Another World Somerset on CBS. So, but that was supposed to be her part.
They actually had another name for her that I'm blanking out on. They turned it into Daphne, but there was another name that Marie Wallace was supposed to go under. By the time I find it, we'll probably have run out of time. But
well, I would tell you,
I found it. Let's see, the role of Nancy Hodiak. Nancy Hodiak was the original name of that character, and that was supposed to be portrayed by Marie Wallace. And then, as you said, Rod, she couldn't do it because she was not available, and that's when they got Lisa Richards.
And Lisa Richards was a minor kind of actress on Dark Shadows, not like Marie. I mean, Marie did 3 very memorable characters, and they had big storylines written about those characters where she was involved in it. But I do want to add this one thing about the movie. The trouble with the movie, if you're somebody who doesn't know and can mentally fill in all the blanks, but if you're, let's say, oh, what's this movie? House of Dark Shadows, let's go see it, okay? There's absolutely no background on any of the characters. I mean, Maggie, what's Maggie in this movie? I mean, she's a governess. That's all we know. We know nothing about where she lives. We know nothing about Collinsport. Did they even mention Collinsport in there or talk about it, that it's a seaside town, that it's in Maine? I don't even remember if they do that, do they?
I don't think so, no.
They kind of just
and they don't give
right
any
story.
Yeah, they don't give you any background on Stokes. Who the hell is he?
Nope.
I mean, we know that Dr. Hoffman is a doctor because she's taking care of Todd, or she took care of Daphne at the beginning. We know Dennis Patrick is a sheriff. That's all we have to know. But we know nothing about Roger.
Again,
I mean, wouldn't...
Yeah.
Some people would think, I mean, I would think it would be a rational thought to think that Roger was Elizabeth's husband, not that her brother.
Yeah, that's true.
Did they even talk about it? They didn't. No. Nothing.
Again, the central point is that this movie was for Dark Shadows fans. So Dark Shadows fans could see it, and they knew immediately what the story was. And here they were seeing everybody on screen. But it did not take into account the non-Dark Shadows fans.
Well, it's interesting because if you are using this as a marketing tool, if you will, to try to pull fans in or pull new fans in, like, yeah, that you kind of have to keep that into account. Like you have your fans that will show up and watch this and go back to the series, but I think part of it has to be you're trying to get people interested in these characters, and being like, wow, okay, like this Barnabas, and you see fans who are like, oh my God, and you know the story, right? And you're like, oh my God, you got to watch this. Like a soap opera, I started watching like Days of Our Lives in the 90s, right? I didn't watch any of it before, but I had other people like, oh my God, and then this character, and then they did this, and then, and so they helped fill in some of those blanks. But
didn't they have somebody possessed on that movie, on that show?
That's when I started watching Marlena. Yeah, when it got Supernatural is when I started watching it.
That was good that they did that.
I hated soap operas up until that point because I was like, oh, now I can get into this whole possession thing, and that was like,
right.
Yeah.
I mean, it was like The Exorcist, if I remember rightly.
Well, yeah, technically, because she threw Stefano out a window. So it was like, what? And like he was the one who was obsessed with her, and he wanted to take her, and so she was like, "Oh, untie me," and he unties her, and then she's like, "And now you're dead."
She heaves him out the window.
Stefano.
So before we cut to our, the next film that we're going to cover, let's do our final thoughts of House of Dark Shadows. So, Rod, what is your final thoughts of House of Dark Shadows?
Well, I enjoyed House of Dark Shadows because I was a big Dark Shadows fan, an original fan. So I tend to overlook its shortcomings. I mean, I used to see a lot of mistakes in Hammer films, you know, and bats on strings, very obvious strings. If you saw Scars of Dracula that came out the same fall as House of Dark Shadows, it's inept. It's almost inept. It's very violent. And I think that's what the House of Dark Shadows was. If I remember rightly from the time when I first saw it, I was most taken aback by the violence and the blood. That's what really surprised me, because there was a lot of it. The scene where they stake Karlen is as good as anything you see in a Hammer film. And I did think that the staking at the end of Barnabas by Jeff Clark was just an amazing piece of choreography. If you have to watch it, it's just great. I don't think that Barnabas, you know, how could he be surprised by Roger Davis, because the spear actually pops out of the front of his thing. That was already buried. If you watch it, it's flat against his chest and it springs forward. So somebody had to set that off. I don't know who did that. So I love it. I watch it every year. I don't like Night of Dark Shadows at all, which I also saw at the cinema. I don't like that. I don't like the music score, which I think is terrible. And that's by Robert Cobbert.
And what about yourself, Tom? What are your final thoughts?
I'm going to preface this by responding. Rod talked about the staking of Karlen, and once again, now this is something that nobody could have anticipated, but in actuality, Thayer David, in Dan Curtis's opinion, was not staking her hard enough. So there was take after take of Thayer David staking Karlen, and no, that's not hard enough, and so. Harder! Stake it harder! Give it to her!
But didn't it require her washing her gown all the time? I mean, there was blood every single time.
I have no. My God! Anyway, so finally, he did editing, which turned out to be real sloppy. But you never see the stake hitting Karlen and the blood gushing out.
No, you don't.
In the Hammer film. In a Hammer film, you always had that kind of thing, but that was once again that was because Curtis felt that he wasn't giving her enough of the business, and so he took the best scene he could and edited it to fudge the rest. But in answer to your question, I felt that I liked it because I was a fan, and I was able to once again to just put everything together. I think the points brought up here are well taken. If you weren't a fan, it was going to be a lot harder to get into it. I was not approaching it from that perspective. I do wish that I could have seen the sympathetic Barnabas a lot more in the film. I thought it was a mistake for him to be more like the traditional horror Dracula, because the story went so far beyond that particular interpretation. And it was so much more multidimensional. And I think that could have really helped the film. And I think that, again, the editing took out 20 minutes. The editing, there were choppy effects and stuff. I understand in Blu-ray, it did look a lot better from the reviews I've seen. And that may have, that particular mechanism may have brought out things in the film that watching it in the theater and the others didn't. I did like it from the perspective of the fan. I was disappointed in Night of Dark Shadows. I agree with Rod. I thought that story was going nowhere and it was too slow. But that's another topic.
And what about yourself?
I should add.
Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to add this. Just take a few seconds. Tom, when you mentioned that Vampire Circus was an innovator because it had children that were vampirized, if you think back to Horror of Dracula and even the Dracula book, the Lucy character is vampirizing children,
That's a good point, but they didn't explicitly show the bite scene until
they didn't.
Purpose. And so that is the difference there. But yes, going back to the Bram Stoker novel, sure, Lucy went after little kids and took them into the park. and you got that, and it was a psychological. Oh my God, you know, she's vampire.
Yeah. It was like, oh God, children. I mean,
Exactly.
and in Horror of Dracula, there's a scene where Lucy is discovered, kind of luring a kid down to where her tomb is.
Right, but once
and
again,
Peter
you don't
Cushing
see
walks
that.
in.
But once again, you don't
I will
see
say this.
that.
I'm so glad that there was not a scene in House of Dark Shadows where Van Helsing or whoever plays the character takes a cross and puts it on the forehead of the vampire. That's been done and it leaves a burn. That's been done so many times, it's not funny.
Yeah.
Well,
And they do it in Horror of Dracula. They do it in Salem's Lot on the miniseries that was shown on TV.
So what about yourself, John? What are your final thoughts?
I would just say note to producers, directors, editors, television producing is very different from movie producing. So this movie, I think it fails in a lot of ways in the sense from the editing perspective, but thankfully from the acting perspective, that's the saving grace of the story. And from my perspective, again, as a newbie to the Dark Shadow series, I fell in love with the characters. I fell in love with certain characters in the story. I wanted to know more, and I wish, like particularly Barnabas, who is a big character, that his character had a strong motivational pull throughout the film, and then that it was either a gradual build or something to that effect. But I think again, it was just for me watching it was very jarring when you're in a moment where someone's getting bitten and then it's like mid-line and all of a sudden it cuts out and you're all of a sudden in a room and you're watching two people have a conversation like, what the hell just happened? Oh wait, I'm in a soap opera. And now if I keep that in my mind, I'm like, yeah, that happens in a soap opera where someone's holding a gun. I'm going to shoot you. I swear to God, I'm going to shoot. And then it just cuts out. And then you see these two people having dinner together. And I love you. I love you too, honey. I do. I really love you. And you're like, what the hell just happened? And so from that perspective, you watch it, you just, it's a television movie, basically.
My final thoughts of House of Dark Shadows is that I think it was a very missed opportunity. I do think that maybe before Dan Curtis directed something, he might have wanted to direct a few episodes of maybe the daytime serial and maybe get interviews of it. But there are some things I really do like about the film. I think it's beautiful to look at. I think it's wonderfully filmed. I think that though the characters, you're not quite sure who they are, I think they all come across very, very well. And they all do an excellent job with the material that they have. I do think that script and direction and editing do let it down. And I personally, I would like them not to do a greatest hits. And maybe if they had like a school full of children where they killed them all off, it might have made it more pleasurable for me. But because but I do think, I do see the merits of it, and I do understand that it is a film for the fans, but I kind of would like a film that would be a celebration of what Dark Shadows really was, instead of a greatest hits medley of of a bunch of stuff that they try to throw together into one package. So So what we're going to do now is we're going to cut to a commercial break, and we have a special interview done by Tom Diamond with Roger Davis, and then we'll have another commercial break, and we'll be back with you after a word from our sponsors.
Morning face. You get it when you don't sleep well. This is what happened to Linda.
Morning, guys.
Good morning. Ah, what is that thing?
It's me, Linda.
Oh my God, it talks! Run!
No, it's me, Linda from HR.
It looks hungry! Save the children! Save them!
What?
Stay back, I've got mace!
Ow, that went in my eyes.
Quit moving!
It's called beauty sleep for a reason. And there's never been a better time to get some.
Get 20% off IKEA Sultan mattresses. IKEA, love your home.
Hello, everybody. This is Tom Diamond, Dark Shadows co-host for the Literary License podcast. We are doing the House of Dark Shadows retrospective, and we have a special treat for you today. Roger Dave, who portrayed Jeff Clark in the House of Dark Shadows movie. And of course, you know him from his regular roles on Dark Shadows as Jeff Clark, also Peter Bradford, Dirk Wilk, and a number of others. Raj, how are you doing today?
Good, thanks.
Well, thank you. I do want to explain, of course, to the fans that Roger has already done a more extensive interview with us.
Yes, indeed. Hi, everybody. And I want to tell you that I'm looking forward to sharing some time with you here and talking about making the Dark Shadows movie, House of Dark Shadows.
Raj, so let's cut to the chase. How, in general, did you were the protagonist, definitely, in that movie, being the main hero against the Barnabas character, played so well by Jonathan.
I'm not so sure that's such a good thing, because remember, everyone was coming to see Barnabas, and this was a very serious vampire movie and a very good one. But in fact, I had an obligation to protect everybody and do the right thing, which was to do away with Barnabas.
I know that before we get, you had a little story to tell about that, but before we get to that, I'm actually interested in and I think the fans are. Do you remember any bloopers during that movie that you could perhaps share with us? You know, some of one of the things that fans love about Dark Shadows is when you can see the mics, the booms, and you run over the gravestones and stuff like that. Now, obviously, the Dark Shadows movie was edited to cut that out, but do you recall any bloopers off the top of your head that you'd like to share with us that ended up on the cutting room floor?
Well, now let me think for a minute about that one, okay?
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna take my jacket off. I'm driving along here in my car, and I'm going to awfully hot in Los Angeles today, I'd say.
And this is the kind of trooper that he is, everybody. I've said that before. But he's doing this interview with us from his car, and so it's not like he's not in the most comfortable place at the moment. But he wanted to make time for us.
Bloopers and Dark Shadows in the movie.
Yep.
Well, let me say this. I've got to explain something. When you're doing a movie, everything's more planned out. You're on location. We weren't in sets that were going to collapse on us. Everything. When we were in on the 53rd Street studio, everything was in one big space. So we might have 5 sets. We would move from one set to the other, and the cameras, the same cameras that were working in one room would be the cameras that were in the next room. And it was really complicated. But when you're on location, and we were up at the Jay Gould estate, Jay Gould was a railroad robber baron who became enormously wealthy and had this wonderful, wonderful Gothic house right on the river. And he used to pull his yacht up to the back of his house where he had a dock and go down to Wall Street. Can you imagine? In his own yacht.
Wow.
And so we were there shooting, and it was really an experience. It was so much fun and so great to be out and away from the studio and in real sets, because you walked into this house and it was lit. Everything we ever wanted for Dark Shadows was in this house and the grounds of this house. Then we did go to a couple of other houses that were very nearby, and one of those houses burned down. I think all the fans know this.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was the old, but that's where Barnabas's casket was, I believe. But do I remember any? Now I don't know if you'd call this a blooper, but remember the climactic scene in the movie was when I shoved the arrow up through the heart of Barnabas.
Right.
And this is rigged so that the arrow is going to, when I hit, that triggered a mechanism around in his back. When I shoved that, then the arrow would come out the front.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Now, I say come out the front, but it all happened so quickly. It was on a spring, and it was triggered with a whole bunch of these bladders filled with this red substance, fake blood, that,
right,
as actors we're all used to, and it always had a peculiar, and it had kind of a sweet smell and kind of a sweet taste. So that you see actors sometimes they're sort of licking the blood around their mouths because that fake blood actually tasted pretty good. So that very last moment where I had to really, I didn't know how hard to hit him, but Dan Curtis took me aside the scene, and he said, when you shove your fist into Barnabas's back or your hand, I want you to shove it as hard as you can shove it. I want you to lift him up if you possibly can. And I said, well, I don't know if I can do that, but I'm going to try. And if you remember the scene, it looks like he lifted up about a foot off the floor, which in truth, I'm going to tell you he did, okay? I shoved him so hard from the backside, not anything that would hurt anybody or anything like that, but it was a shock to him, and Jonathan was an actor who wanted to know what was coming, okay? He wasn't an actor about surprises. He wasn't really improvised. Right. He was a prepared actor. He was a Canadian, serious Shakespearean actor.
Correct.
And it was important to him to have things go the way they were supposed to go, okay? Not anything that was haphazard.
Okay.
We'll use the circumstances, Mike. He was the opposite of the kind of actor I was, which was going to do, I knew where and what and how. But I loved the idea of magical things happening accidentally, things that kind of caught you. I remember once in a scene with Victoria Winters, and she said something about an airplane. And I was, of course, I didn't know. I'm in the 18th century. I don't know what an airplane is. And it was a very funny moment with us. And she says, airplane? What? And she goes, oh. And she started laughing, really naturally laughing, and said, oh, it's, well, it doesn't matter. And, it was just a nice moment. It was very natural. And, but Jonathan was not expecting what was coming. So Dan said, hit him with all you've got, and I hit him with all I had, but it wasn't, I don't mean, took my fist and punched him in the back. I just pushed as hard as I could, and Dan had said, push him up. I wanted to go up because that's the way the arrow is set to fly out of him. Now, he wasn't telling Barnabas any of this, okay?
Right.
Because Jonathan had 1,000,001 things to think about at that particular point. And I understood the way he worked. So, when I did it,
I would also.
You saw the results.
Yep.
Because if you've seen the movie, you've seen the results.
Yep.
Okay. I push him in the back. He goes up about a foot. The arrow flies about him, and blood is spurting everywhere. And it's, now what you heard in the background, I'm in downtown LA on my way back out to Malibu, and that was just a gunshot.
Oh my God!
On site. No big deal. I'm hiding behind the pump at the gas station.
This is reality.
Now,
reality.
Stay here, insert your card, move rapidly. I do it, and the scene is perfect. One take. We literally did that in one take. Dan is he's ecstatic, okay? Wow, that's great, that's perfect.
He blew you a kiss, I understand. Dan Curtis.
No. It was a double whammy. He put both of his hands together on his lips and went, wah!
Wow.
You know?
Well, he liked it.
And
he liked it.
He really liked it.
Yep.
And now, Jonathan turns around and says, he's dead serious. And he looks at me, and he says, and very rarely did he ever curse, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Very rarely, okay? And he said, why did you push me so goddamn hard? I said, Jonathan, I'm sorry. Dan told me to do this, told me, go jump on Dan. Well, he did. He went straight to Dan.
Oh, he did?
Said, he unloaded on Dan, but he did that many times. I mean, there were many. Jonathan was a very, very serious actor.
Yeah.
He was a good actor.
Yeah.
And he held Dark Shadows in the palm of his hand.
That's right.
And he was mesmerizing, and he was great fun to watch. And even when he, looked at the camera, didn't know his lines, hesitated, said the wrong thing, he could say, I don't think you should not go there. I don't think you should go there. I think you should go there. Part of what made Dark Shadows wonderful.
It certainly...
Everybody loved.
Well, at least Jonathan wasn't just mad at you. He was also mad at Dan. And he...
he was just surprised. When he turned around, I said, I did, of course, say, Jonathan, it worked like a charm. And he goes, I know, okay. But you still did, I just did what Dan told me to do.
Sure.
Okay. He went straight to Dan. No ifs, ands, or buts. He went right over to him and sure exactly what he said, and sure he unloaded a good bit of surprise. But I have to tell you, when you saw that scene, I mean, Jonathan, there is no way Jonathan didn't love that scene.
Well, I'm sure he did. I think the only thing, though, I do recall reading that he was not happy that his voice boomed. They had that reverb effect when he said, Clark, and Clark, and then that reverberation.
Actually, we didn't hear that reverb. That was added later. But I will tell you that he didn't need it.
Yep.
I'm here to tell you that his voice reverb, it just didn't do claw, 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 that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But it's wonderful. It was just wonderful. And it was a sustained claw, and it just filled the entire atrium of this enormous old mansion. And I tell you, it would stop you. Remember, that was just he had his hand out, and he was also putting me into a trance.
Right.
And it was sure easy to go into it. And then I came slowly down the steps, and he said a line that I've never forgotten. It was so wonderful. It was something, every wedding needs a witness clock, and you shall be witness
to this one.
I think it was, you shall be witness to my wedding.
No, it was, and you
so
shall
wonderful.
and you shall be witness to this one. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
And that's what made it really special, because when Jonathan was able to, you betrayed me, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
That was the essence of the Barnabas character, the man who felt betrayed, but was able to express it in such emotion. And the way Jonathan...
You're so right that the Dark Shadows movie was wonderful because Barnabas, think about it, he knew his lines. He didn't have to worry. We rehearsed. It wasn't like we weren't under the pressure that we were in the day-to-day making of Dark Shadows.
Yep.
Very important, because later Jonathan came to visit me at my home in Kentucky, and he was staying at my hotel, and he was doing arsenic and old lace. And I invited him out to my house. Was on 200 acres, and it was about 15,000 square feet. It was quite a place. It had a maze bigger than in The Shining, and it had apple orchards. And I remember and it had nothing but candles in the living room and dining room. So we lighted the sconces, and that Jonathan, when we walked into the living room from the foyer, which had these two giant Palladian doors that went into the living room and dining room, he said, it was so cute, he said, shades of Dark Shadows. And I thought it was really funny. I told him how good I thought he was, because we went to see him in the show, and he was wonderful. He was wonderful because he knew all his lines. He didn't have to worry about, gosh, as soon as Jonathan would finish the show, he had to worry about all the next day's show. And so it was so much for him to think about.
You may remember the party scene. That was the one where you're giving the claret cup to Kathryn Leigh Scott as Maggie, and everybody's socializing with each other.
But wasn't I dressed?
Yes.
Dressed in a George Washington.
Yes,
costume?
exactly. It was a costume party.
Gold epithets and yeah, I remember we stood around for hours waiting for that scene to the lighting and everything to be ready. The cameraman on that show was, I had worked for him a number of times out in Hollywood, and because remember when I did Dark Shadows, I'd already done 2 series and started to do another series,
right?
And then decided that I would go back to New York and get serious, go back and apply myself with stage work. And I had worked with Arthur, who was the cameraman before, and he was so good. He was only the cameraman on the House of Dark Shadows. He was not anything to do with the camera work at the studio. So there's a whole other look to the movie, which was extraordinary. And you were, boy, I'm trying to think if there were some. Yeah, I think, out in the solarium, there was a little bit of a blooper. There was, it was a very spooky scene. Caroline comes from around the corner, and, it really looks like that. That pool had been abandoned for many years, and it was exactly the way it was. That was not dressed at all. All we did as actors was walk in there, and I remember... I know that Caroline and David were in that scene, weren't they? Wasn't David playing with a ball or something?
Yeah, I'm not sure. That might have been actually one of the deleted scenes from the movie. Oh, no, the ball. Oh, that, okay. I know what you're talking about. Yeah, the ball rolled. Karlen is a vampire. And he's in the solarium, and if I do this, Karlen isn't dead. That kind. He's doing a sing-song thing, and he rolls the ball. Yes, and then she comes at him. He sees her, and it was actually a deleted scene because she had bared her fangs, and Dan Curtis wanted that out of the movie.
All I remember was at the moment they got ready to do that, and it was a very critical moment of the scene.
Mm-hmm.
A big shard of glass fell down because the thing was glass, and it was a glass solarium where the pool was, and it scared the bejesus out of everybody. Remember how, everybody was supposed to be so scared, but this thing happened and everybody went, oh my God, what,
Yeah,
and
sure.
Suddenly, from being spooky in the situation and Karlen and a vampire, we were just normal human beings jumping to, of course they had to cut, but I don't know. I don't think that's a blooper. I have to tell you, the Dark Shadows movie didn't have many bloopers.
Which means it was well done.
It didn't have bloopers like, you walk in and you pull the shade down and and the whole shade comes down.
The shard thing is interesting because, that is something that happens just like that you can't anticipate.
The movie itself was shot in surroundings that were so pristinely perfect for the milieu, for what we were doing, that it was really, it was just wonderful. It was just wonderful. And there weren't many bloopers.
We didn't talk about Louis Edmonds. How did you get along with Louis Edmonds on the movie? How, and in general, what are your reminiscences of Louis?
Oh, I had a great time with Louis. He was a fun guy. He was always charming and always very up, and he was always Louis. A great moment I remember with Louis, and he was really on up in years and had that operation on his chin, and he had had some great difficulties. But I had started a shirt company, and I gave him one of my shirts, and he was so touched. I mean, really touched. And it was a great feeling to give something to someone who really appreciated it. Louis was he almost seemed like he couldn't break the facade of Louis Edmonds, in his role,
right,
as the patriarch. But he was terrific. The minute he wasn't acting, he was a fine guy who was enjoying it and appreciating just about everything that was going on, even the things that didn't go well. Although I have to say, nobody likes to be the brunt of the joke. Nobody likes it when they are, when it's a mistake that they might make. Nobody likes that. And it was hard for any of us when we really messed up.
Yeah.
And we all had those times. We all had them.
As I recall in the movie, I think you had to actually stake Louis in the movie. That was the only time that Roger Collins ever became a vampire in the movie, if you remember that. You had that big fight with Thayer David in the, at St. Eustace Island, where you actually were struggling with each other and everything. Do you recall anything about either?
Yes, down in the water.
Yeah.
We went a little more down into the water than Thayer wanted to go. Okay.
I hope you didn't drown him.
And when we got through, he said, "If we have to do that again, don't drag me so deep down into that water."
Yeah, he was afraid. He was afraid he was going to drown. Then you would have had more.
We were. I'm not sure that we didn't wind up doing. Well, we did go into the water. I do remember that.
No, and it's funny because vampires can't stand to cross water. That's one of the legends. So that's. He
was so charming. He was just so charming. I just have to tell you that Thayer, he was very precise in terms of what he was expecting out of a scene. And if it didn't go right, so we never had any problem. We never had any problem. He knew that I knew what I was about, and he knew. We rolled with it. It was great. It was great. That was. I think that was a pretty scary little sequence.
Oh, it was. What were your, Dan asked you to come back to do it, and what were your, what were your thoughts that first day?
My memory is I didn't go back to Dark Shadows. I just did the movie.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
And I remember that I was then married to Jacqueline Smith, and we lived at 91st and Park, and we had a parlor floor, so we had these giant windows that were like, I'm going to say, 6 feet wide and about 12 feet high. Wow. They were double windows, so they were 6 and 6.
Okay.
They had enormous ceilings. A limo came and picked me up. Of course, we can look out onto Park Avenue.
Yep.
And across the street was this wonderful church. And it was, I remember, my wife now, yes, her name was Jacqueline Smith to all of you on the show business, but her name was Jacqueline Ellen Smith, and I never called her anything but Ellen. So when I'm talking about Ellen, I'm just saying I'm talking about Jacqueline.
No problem.
So she was at the window, and she was sort of watching for them because I was getting ready, and she said she thought, I don't know what she thought was coming to pick me up, okay? But I remember her saying, "There's a great big limousine out front." And I said, "Oh my, well, that's pretty cool." And she said, "Well, look at this, my movie star husband." And she gave me a big kiss, and I was off to my first day of shooting the Dark Shadows movie. I don't think that I have a lot of memories about that first day. I really don't. I can't remember how much we did, what we did, where we did it, and any of those things. It was exciting. I remember the first thing we did was makeup was down, I believe, in the basement of I hope I'm not.
I heard about that. No, I think you're right. I think you're right.
I could be mixing this up. I did a movie called Ruby, and it's Piper Laurie and
I remember that
one.
And
Stuart Whitman and I starred in it. And I hope I'm not mixing up the basement makeup room for that with the basement makeup room for House of Dark Shadows. But I do remember, of course, the first place you go is makeup.
Right.
And we were all excited. We were, I think, one of the very first scenes that we did, and Dan had done, and it was a good idea that he had, because I think it was a scene around a table where we were all meeting around a table in this big, wonderful dining room. Do you remember the scene?
The dinner where you were all at dinner and looking, and
I think though it seemed to me it was daytime. I think that was the scene that day. I think that was the scene. It sort of brought everybody together because we were all in it, except for Barnabas. I remember that. And there was a camaraderie, and there was just immense excitement that we were not on a soundstage on 53rd Street, but we were actually on location making this really, very Class A movie for MGM. And, it turned out to be one of the highest grossing films at MGM that year, if not the highest.
That's absolutely.
I heard some rumors that it was, in fact, the highest grossing.
And it saved them from bankruptcy at that particular time, from what I understand.
Yes, now I didn't know that, but I did certainly know that it was a very high grossing film. But we, of course, didn't know it was going to be a high grossing film. It's just that everything. We had a great script. It really was a really good script. And I was excited by that. And Dan had sent it to me to read. And I thought it was wonderful. And I had agents who didn't want me to do that. And I said, no, I read the script. And it's a terrific script. And I owe Dan Curtis. And I really can't be talked out of this. I'm going to do it. Mm-hmm. And I'm so happy I did do it. Wish I'd pushed my weight around and got a little better billing. Yeah.
Well, it's always Monday morning.
I never even thought about it. We were the Dark Shadows gang, Mm-hmm. You didn't really think about billing.
Yeah.
No, that was, but.
Well, 50 years later, and you're still getting some billing, Roger, of a different sort, So.
There's always. It's like I used to hear Marlon Brando in these interviews. They would say, "What is it like to be such a great actor?" He goes, "You're acting right now. We're all acting. Every day we act. We act all day long. We tell lies. We fake it. We pretend that something's funny when it isn't. We pretend to be surprised when we're not.
Yep.
Life is just, what is it but acting? All you have to do is just be yourself and do the same stuff you do all day long everywhere."
That's wise. That's very wise. Let's go to the last day. What do you remember about that?
The last day, I remember being very, this was it for me for Dark Shadows.
Yeah.
This was it, I was going to go home that day and Dark Shadows was over for me. And so I had this big rush of being able to do the movie, and then this huge letdown because I'm driving, I'm being driven home in a limo. And it was, I know that it was the evening for sure, and Ellen and I were going out for dinner.
Right.
And I think she was in the lobby, and so when we came and pulled up in the lobby, she came out to the car, I remember, but I'm not so sure that anybody was still in the car with me. I think they had taken everybody else home. because I was I was way up on the Upper East Side, and I think they had gotten off, down closer to the studio or something. I don't know. I think somebody had left something at the studio and had to go back. So I remember we pulled up on 53rd Street, and of course there were a lot of memories of 53rd Street as I was sitting there in the car thinking about all of this and truly realizing that it was, although the beginning, it was still, to show you how it was the end of Dark Shadows, it really, we didn't do any reshoots. There wasn't anything that I recall being reshot. Most of the time when you do a movie, you'll go back in for retakes. You go back in for what we call pickup shots, but there were no pickups and there were no retakes. Dan apparently got it all. Now,
was there?
Remember that they still could have been. They probably were still shooting the show.
Yes, they were. Yes, they were.
I may have finished before other people, and that's extremely likely.
Was there a rap party? Was there a rap party or anything like that you recalled when that film ended?
Yes, there absolutely was. It was at, I remember that rap party because Ellen's family had the top floor of that hotel.
Did Dan ever call you back for that second movie? I know you weren't in the second movie, or at that point were you too busy? No. Okay.
No, okay. I wasn't in back to California, and I was making something in California.
I got you.
I can remember I went to Acapulco to make a movie called River of Gold. It was a TV movie. It was Dak Rambo and myself were the stars, and the girl opposite me, there was a love story in it, and the love story was Suzanne Plachette and myself. I remember we got down on the beach in Acapulco, and she's telling everybody, she's saying, God, here I am, co-starring with Roger Davis, who was just a kid at Warner Brothers when Troy and I were married. She was married to Troy Donahue when I went under contract to Warner, and Troy was the biggest star on the lot, and she was a big deal herself. And now she's in Acapulco doing this show with me, which was a remake of an old show called Adventures in Paradise. Remember that show? It had Gardner McKay was the lead.
Oh yeah, that's a long, yep.
Great looking guy.
Yep.
And so anyway, I go down to Acapulco, and I'm supposed to be going around the world on a yacht. Dak and I were going around the world on a yacht. So we were coming into the bay in Acapulco, and I discovered that something I didn't know about myself was that I get seasick. And just riding into the bay on this boat, I got terribly seasick.
Oh, my God.
And, oh, my, especially since I was supposed to do a big scene as I sailed into the bay in Acapulco. And Suzanne I remember her just laughing her tail off, saying, some leading man, he's over there sick as a dog. And I really was. We actually wound up on the yachting shots, having to take the yachting shots, and then we would get in very still water and have the yacht move with me on it so I wouldn't get sick. So it was a very good thing that it did not become a series, because I don't know if I could have done it.
She was a very smart woman, I understand. She was a very intelligent woman, I understand, Suzanne Plachette.
Very. She was very, very bright, very witty, a lot of fun. I went to her house a lot. She had a husband named Tommy. I remember Tommy was sort of, I don't know what Tommy did, if he did anything. I think he was just Mr. Suzanne Plachette. And he was a terrific guy. She was very sarcastic. She had a great sense of humor. She was very sarcastic. If she didn't like you, she wouldn't have anything to do with you at all.
But you know, I understand.
we got along great.
I think her parents, her father, I think, was in the movie theater business. I think it was either Lowe's or Paramount. I don't remember, but she came out of that.
She was from the city. I mean, New York.
Yes, so I think it was either Lowe's or Paramount. I'm not sure.
She was very sophisticated kind of person.
We, of course, on behalf of the Literary License Podcast, we do want to thank Roger for helping us out today with his reminiscences on House of Dark Shadows. You will be hearing bigger interview with us later on in the podcast season, so be sure to keep tuning in and wait for that. And Raj, would you like to say goodbye to the fans before we sign off?
Yes, absolutely. Listen, thank you all so much for both. Thank you for your loyalty, for all of the good times that we've had at conventions. Thank you for watching and enjoying and appreciating the show. And just know that whatever you hear and whatever things are written, just remember that everybody has his own perspective on things, but we all worked hard. We all tried to make the show great. I had fun with every part I played, whether it was Peter Bradford or Jeff Clark or Ned Stewart or Charles Delaware Tate, or the ghost of Charles Delaware Tate, or finally my vampire. I finally got to play the vampire. That was great. I finally got to be a bad guy. So that was my Dirk Wilkins.
That's right. That's right.
And all of it was just a blast. Really a blast. So thank you, and I hope we get to see each other's, before it's over.
It's never over until it's over, and it isn't over yet. Take care of yourselves, and until next time.
Hello?
What's your favorite scary movie?
I have a bunch of favorite movies. I watch them all on Shudder.com for only $4.99 a month.
That's a scary low price.
But if I had to pick a favorite, it'd probably be Scream.
Oh.
Yeah, it's the only streaming service that lets me watch hundreds of horror movies on demand.
I'll be right back.
Hello? Hello? Hello, are you gonna subscribe? Hello?
Go to Shudder.com to subscribe. If you dare.
Hello, welcome back to the Literary License Podcast, and now we're going to be discussing the Trilogy of Terror, the 1975. But before, we'd like to thank Roger Davis for his interview, and Tom, I believe we have an additional person we need to thank for that interview.
Absolutely. Don Capone, one of my voiceover friends, really helped out on this one. The interview was done very graciously. Roger was driving in the car, going from one errand to another while we did this interview, and he was on the highway actually for part of it. And so there were technical problems with some of the recording aspects, and Don Capone, C-A-P-O-N-E, graciously cleaned all this stuff up. And the result is really, really striking. And I want to not only thank him, but if there are any casting directors out there, or any voiceover people who could use Don's services, he is at www.doncapone.com, doncapone.com, all small case letters, if his services are ever desired. Thank you once again, Don. Great help for us.
And of course, if you're a member of our subscribing list for our newsletter, we'll put all those details in our newsletter, and they will be in our show notes, which will be available on Podbean, iTunes, YouTube, etc. So this brings us to Trilogy of Terror, the 1975 American-made for television anthology horror film, which was directed by Dan Curtis and was starring Karen Black. It features 3 segments, each based on unrelated short stories by Richard Matheson, who you probably know from writing episodes for Twilight Zone. He was also a novelist, and he also wrote a series of well-made films. The first follows a college professor who seeks vengeance over her date rape. The second is about twin sisters who have a bizarre relationship. And the third focuses on a woman terrorized by a Zuni fetish doll in her apartment. Black stars in all 3 segments and plays dual roles in the second. The film was first aired on the ABC Movie of the Week on March 4th, 1975. Black initially turned down the project, but reconsidered when her then-husband, Robert Burton, was cast in the first segment, Julia. The television film has had a sequel called Trilogy of Terror 2, which was written and also directed by Dan Curtis, and this was released in 1996. So, John, do you have anything about the making of Trilogy of Terror, the 1975 made-for-television film?
Nothing that much. I mean, for me, it's like I was even trying to look up notes. There's not too many notes on the making of this. I think it's actually interesting. I never realized it was a made-for-TV type movie, which is fascinating to me because I saw this when I was like, I'm probably too young, 13 or 14.
Mm-hmm.
My brothers were like, oh, we're gonna watch this Trilogy of Terror, which was on Beta or VHS, one of them. So I find that fascinating, especially it's ABC, which is again very fascinating.
Well, you have to have a little bit of background on what was going on because ABC was traditionally the third-rated network at the time. Eventually, they became number one when they had Happy Days and Laverne and Shirley and Charlie's Angels and stuff like that on there.
Yeah.
But in the mid '70s, at that point, right then, they weren't, and they had actually been doing. I think, Tom, maybe you can correct me, but I think since the fall of '69, they had been doing a movie of the week, which a movie that was made just for TV, and some of them have become, like Kolchak was one of them.
Sure.
They've become quite famous. Brian's song.
I was going to say Sybil
yeah.
was on NBC too, so I guess that time there was like an insurgence of sort of.
Well, they also did
Sybil,
they did really good horror ABC movie of the week. They did like The Initiation of Sarah.
And Satan's School for Girls. They had that in there, and they had. Is that the one that had Jonathan Frid as a mute butler?
Yeah.
Daughters of Satan, a daughter of the devil, or something like that.
Was it To the Devil a Daughter? Now I'm not remembering.
No, that's Hammer Films.
That's Hammer.
That's a Hammer Films. I think
you're absolutely right. He played a mute servant, and
right. He never spoke a word.
Never spoke a word, and we all thought that was very unfortunate because it didn't give him an opportunity to display his acting abilities. But on the other hand, he was very, very with his facial expressions. He was very, very emotive, and that just goes to show you what a consummate actor he was. Is that he didn't have to actually speak, although it was wonderful. But you could just take a look at his face, and he could portray emotions that way. It was very good. But
so ABC had a history of showing made-for-TV horror films. So when Trilogy of Terror came on. Now, also Duel, that's that famous Steven Spielberg directed film with Dennis Weaver in it, where a truck is following him on the highway and terrorizing him for no reason. That was a great movie. That was also made for TV. Did they call it like ABC TV Movie of the Week? Is that what it was called?
Yeah.
I think they added a second one, like a Tuesday night made for TV movies. But a lot of them were pilots, extended pilots for TV shows. So when Trilogy of Terror came along, it kind of just fit in with everything else. There was nothing special about it in the sense that they didn't say, you've got to definitely watch this because the third part is the scariest. They never said that. Well, everybody discovered it on their own.
Well, remember also, and we had touched on this, that the Night Stalker had the highest. That was 1972, and that had the highest rating of TV movies up to that particular point. And again, kind of focusing, I guess everybody remembered Dark Shadows, and that was a marvelous thing. The Night Strangler, and between those two films. And a couple of others, The Darkness That Blazed In and so forth. I don't know when The Turn of the Screw was made. That might have been later. But
that was done for late at night. That was like ABC's World of Entertainment or something. They didn't have a talk show at 11:30, so they'd show these made-for-TV movies. Then Came the Darkness. I think that was one of them.
Right. So
it had Pamela Franklin in it, I think.
So I think there was certainly enough of a. Curtis had enough of a following, so they gambled on Trilogy of Terror. And I will tell you one story that Roger Davis told me, that Curtis was very enamored with Karen Black, her acting, the way she came off on screen, and Curtis really wanted her for that movie. And so that was probably, and that may have contributed. And I think, of course, you're going to discuss that. Keith, and you guys take the lead because Trilogy of Terror is I'm more of the Dark Shadows now. But I remember watching Trilogy of Terror when I was a kid, and her performance, especially in the last one, I think it was Amelia, was really quite riveting.
Yeah.
And obviously we'll go into this more, but the little Zuni doll, and I remember reading something about the fact that Curtis really did a great job of structuring the way that doll, the way that doll moved through the room so fast. That was done with some kind of movie technique, and it was extremely effective. And that, of course, contributed to the success of that second.
Yeah, I can see why that would.
I mean, what's quite interesting about Trilogy of Terror, it has developed a cult following over the years and has earned a reputation as a cult classic. It also helped make Karen Black a devoted cult following as far as a perform in horror films. Also, actually killed her career when it came to dramatic roles. So it's kind of like a blessing.
I agree with you.
Blessing and a curse.
I guess maybe it's the Dan Curtis curse. Barnabas made Jonathan Frid, but it kind of killed everything else off for him.
Well, she already had a great career before she did that. I mean, she was nominated for Oscars and everything.
Yeah.
So.
Now, the interesting thing about Trilogy of Terror in 2011, Complex Magazine named Trilogy of Terror as the 4th greatest television film of all time, while MeTV deems it the scariest television film of all time in 2016. Now, with the sequel to Trilogy of Terror 2, which appeared October 30th, 1996, this was, again, as we discussed, directed by Dan Curtis, but it was also starred Lizette Anthony. Now, people who don't know about Lizette Anthony, she is part of the Me Too movement with the Weinstein one, which we're not going to really discuss, but she was also the new Angelique in the 1991 revamp of Dark Shadows. So obviously he used her again.
6 degrees of separation, folks.
6 degrees of separation, yeah. So, Rod, what are your thoughts on Trilogy of Terror?
Well, I didn't watch Trilogy of Terror when it first came on because I had found that some of those, most of the TV movies, the horror movies, were pretty anemic. To me, the scariest one that I ever saw was called Don't Be Afraid of the Dark, that had Kim Darby in it and Jim Hutton, which is Timothy Hutton's father. And that was really spooky. That was eerie to the point where I didn't dare go upstairs unless I had the light on because who knows where these creatures are lying or waiting to jump out at you. So I did not watch Trilogy of Terror when it was first on, but when it was repeated, by then, of course, I had read and heard about the Zuni warrior one, so I wanted to watch that. And the first 2 stories, I don't even remember the one about the date rape thing, and the thing about Amelia, not Amelia, the identical twins. They were just as far. It was almost like a mini Sybil. There's the sexy broad, and then there's the prim and proper broad, and the big shocker is, well, I'm not going to spoil it for anybody, but the shocker you could see coming the first time you saw Karen Black.
Yeah.
You just could figure it out that something like this was going to happen. I think James Storm was in that episode, wasn't he?
Yes, he was. Yes. I think in the first one.
And Simso, the guy that came there, was she killing the people, or what was? I can't even remember what the heck.
So, I mean, she ended up being like a Black Widow, basically. Like, you think he's got the upper hand, like he was luring her to then drug her and rape her and then use her.
Right.
And then you find out she just is kind of like, well, I'm done with this game. And he's like, what? And she basically she's been the one manipulating him, and she kills him. And then she has a whole book of all the different guys that she's killed off. And then it ends with the student going like, and what a perfect job for her to be in, right? Like, she's a professor. So a young, strapping lad comes and he needs tutoring, and she's like, sure, do you want to start now between my thighs? And he's like, sure, why not?
I seem to remember that guy that came in at the end was a well-known person.
It was Greg Harrison from Trapper John M.D.
Okay, all right. Yes. Yeah, that was way before that show came on, so I knew that he was well-known. So anyway, when I watched the Zuni Warrior one, I liked the background where, I mean, they actually gave some background about her mother. You know, she obviously didn't get along well with her mother. She wanted to. Her mother was, you know, one of these demanding women, nagging and whatever. And she said, I don't know why she said, did she say, I bought this for you?
No, she
for her boyfriend or her new boyfriend.
It was an
Oh,
anthropology.
is that what it is? Okay.
Yeah.
And then, of course, after we read the little scroll that's on it, the fact that the little chain fell off came as no big surprise. So everybody's waiting to see what happens then. And I liked it. I really did. There were some parts that actually made me laugh. I mean, when she was screaming and this thing was coming at her and she was on the bed and it was...
Well, I mean, the fact that it is a 5-inch, 6-inch doll that's on the floor. What, you can't kick the damn thing, or you can't there's moments where I remember as a kid not being terrified of this doll, but like kind of laughing, like seriously, like all she has to do is drop a couch on it, like or you know,
Right.
like it's like, why? What's so hard about this?
The size changed too, I think. I mean, sometimes it was bigger than it was.
Yeah.
I mean, when it was chasing her around and zipped out of the closet and she caught it in a box or a piece of luggage. I don't know which one she did. She was in the closet. That's right. She had a piece of luggage in there. It seemed smaller, but when she first had it on the coffee table and she was talking to her mother, it seemed much larger than that, I thought. It was almost like maybe 9 or 10 inches high instead of being like 5 inches high. But the ending part was great. I did love it. You know, she was going to get revenge on her mother. I'm not going to spoil it for everybody. But I did see the sequel.
Yeah.
I know. Well, I didn't say what happened to her, but
we always like caveat. I think people know with us, we discuss it very freely. We say spoiler alert.
Oh, well, then I will say that she's possessed by the Zuni warrior now. And she's got the teeth, which she made sure to show.
I wasn't sure if she called her or she actually called the guy, because I kind of was confused by that, because I was like,
it was her mother.
Okay.
She said, "You can come over now, Mom," or whatever, and you just. And then the sequel begins immediately after that, where the bodies are being taken away.
Where were you able to see that, Rod? Because I've been looking to see where I can get.
I bought it. I went to. There used to be a store in the mall called Suncoast Video. I'm sure they had that where you guys are too.
I remember that. Yeah.
And I bought it on VHS. And it was very cheap. It was like $6, and I'd never seen it before, and it was called Trilogy of Terror 2. So I popped it in, and I actually, the only story besides that I remember was about a woman whose son kept coming back to haunt her, which I thought was very good. It was very well done. But I can't remember the first one unless it was about graveyard rats or something. There was some kind of jewelry they were after, and they had to dig up the graves, but there were rat tunnels, and these things were monstrous rats and killed them all or whatever. But the Zuni warrior takes up immediately where it left off, and the charred body of this Zuni is brought to a lab where, what's her name, the woman, Lisette Anthony, is the technician there. And they leave her alone, of course. They've got to leave her alone in this huge building, and this thing comes to life again. You know, starts chasing her around. The only thing I didn't like about it was that they repeated scenes, like the scene where the Zuni was inside a piece of luggage and she's trying to grab the knife as it's popping out. Do you remember that? And she was cutting herself on it.
Yeah.
They did almost in the exact same sequence, except it was a cardboard box.
It's that uncomfortable scene where the person's trying to grab and you're like, why are you grabbing the blade? And you know they're grabbing, you're like, ow, ow, ow. You're with them, ow, ow, my God, ow.
She should have used a towel. I don't know why she was doing it with her fingers.
Or it's like when a person picks up a piece of glass and they're holding it in their hand and they're going to use it as a weapon. You're like, you know that's going to fucking hurt. Like, why are you holding a piece of glass? And you're like, okay, I'm going to hold a piece of glass. Oh, God, you know.
Yeah, it's always a shard of a mirror that you must use in force to push down while it digs into your palm on two sides. I mean, that doesn't make any sense to me.
But it is that because we all relate to that. We're all like, God, I would never, would I do that? Oh, my God, I don't know. Oh, that has to hurt you. When they're doing it, you're hurting with them. You're kind of like, ooh, ow, ooh, you know.
That's why you carry it.
I actually thought that the sequel was good. It was well done. It was all directed by Dan Curtis. The whole thing was directed by Dan Curtis again. And you know, by that point, he'd already done his big epics. So it was kind of
a great homage to his to the kind of closing of it. I mean, I was funny because the first time I saw Trilogy of Terror, I must have skimmed over the first two because all I remember was that damn doll. So when I rewatched it again a couple days ago, I was like, oh my God, I literally don't remember these first two. Like, did I just black out? Because I thought the first one was good. I thought it was interesting. It was an interesting twist where I'm like, oh, okay, so that. The second one was Sybil, basically. It was predictable in the sense, like, I was like, oh, I think I know what's going to happen. Oh, and the big twist, bum, 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 Punky Brewster's dad takes a wig off, and she was one person, like,
Yeah, she was one person. Oh, what a shocker.
Oh, okay. And then I was like, well, and then when I rewatched Amelia, I thought, this is still as good as the first time I saw it. It's still, there's something about it that just was fun. The one thing that I did notice this time around is when she's like so excited to see the guy, and then she goes and she calls her mom, and she's trying to rationalize with her mother, like, but mother, it's one night, I'm going, I'll come see you, whatever. She goes in the shower and she comes out and she's like, I have to cancel my date. I'm like, what happened in the shower, girl? What did you just have some sort of weird epiphany that you can't go on this date with your man? Like, what happened? And so then she kind of cancels a date, but then I realized she needed to do that in order to have things transpire in the home.
Well, I think also, now, correct me if I'm wrong, but apparently a blooper actually made it into the first film on Amelia, where when the Zuni doll bites her neck, you can actually see the blood tube, where apparently the blood is pouring out of a blood tube. So I don't know that actually, but when I read about that, I said, oh, Shades of Dark Shadows. With all the,
I was much too mesmerized by her Brady Bunch kitchen that she had. It was decorated in early 70s.
I agree. Yeah. And then she's like taking her. First of all, then she's like, she's taking her meat out and she's all cooking it. She's like, I'm like, aren't you supposed to see your mother? Like, what the fuck are you cooking for?
I know,
what are you cooking right now? I'm like, what?
Well,
the hell?
I mean, I have to sit there and say that with these three films, of course, anytime they have a anthology film, which is what this is, you always have a strong story and a couple lesser ones.
Weak ones, yeah.
And I have to sit there and say, rewatching it this time and casting it with a millennial eye on it now from the first time, Julia, the first story, I actually do like. I think it's well acted. It's very well. It works within the confines of the story. The twist comes at a bit of a surprise that you think that, especially when you're part of this whole Me Too generation that we have at the moment and the objectified of women. I think it works very well in today's kind of setting where you have the whole date rape thing, and you think that he's abusing his situation where he's like, come over, I got a bunch of friends I'm going to meet you. I mean, he's whoring her out. And this whole story is like unfolding to you. And of course, it is a 1970s TV movie. So, it leads, you have to use your imagination and you have to put story fragments together, not like today where everything would be spelled out for you. I mean, if it was made today, basically, she would be at wherever he took her to and everybody would be having their turn with her in full frontal magnificence of, soft form. But because it's 1970s, we're led to this thing and that he's leading her along, and you're kind of watching this going, this is kind of very uncomfortable if you look at the situation and if you apply the situation to today.
Well, also, go ahead. Correct me. Go ahead.
It's very uncomfortable, and you're kind of watching it. But then when the tables turn, you're kind of going, oh my God. And then the thing is that it does have a slight twist of a supernatural hint to it, that she actually put this information into his brain, and that basically, and then you find out that, this is one of a long series of she's commits.
Well, I wasn't sure if it was supernatural or because weren't they studying psychology? So was it a subliminal, like she put this in his head? Like,
well, no, she was an English teacher because in the English teacher she was talking about the triangle of fiction, where you have Hemingway at the bottom and then you have Faulkner on the right and so on and so forth.
Okay.
So she's not.
So do you think she was like a witch or something? Like, because that's what I.
Well, she sit there and said that she put the thought into his head, that every feeling that he had is a feeling that came from her, and she was fine with you when she let you think that you were in demand. If the guy was, and she played along with that game until she got bored, and then she became like the Black Widow, where she would like kill kill the mate and move on to the next one.
Well, I think it should be mentioned that William F. Nolan did the teleplay for the first two segments. Richard Matheson did Amelia. Richard Matheson didn't want to do the first two segments. I have no idea why. And it may have had something to do with the quality of the writing, where Amelia is the segment the Trilogy of Terror is remembered for, and the other two are like, oh, okay, those are like fillers, that kind of thing.
Well, I have to sit there and say that the first two, though they are based on Richard Matheson's short stories, they do feel kind of like rejects from Night Gallery.
Yeah.
At the time, Richard Matheson was working with Rod Serling on Night Gallery, which was, I think, at NBC at that time. And it's, Night Gallery is very good, but it was very uneven. And I think, I think the first one's a good, strong story, and I think it's quite an interesting one. The second one, unfortunately, I think the Millicent and Therese storyline, I do think that it's well filmed. I think it plays out very well. But unfortunately, we are left with something that you kind of know what the outcome's going to be from the very first time that she opens her mouth. And you kind of do, I'm not sure what kind of story device that they wanted to put in here, but the way that you had the contrast, the way the two sisters are dressed, you got one who's dressed up like she just came out of Whistler's mother's painting, and then you got the blonde hooker woman, and you're kind of going, okay, well, and if you look at the setting in 1975, did people dress like that outside of an old woman?
I mean, I kind of equate it to, Bewitched, but rather Samantha's a little bit more modern mom versus, like Samantha and Sabrina. She's definitely the Sabrina. What's her name? Vanessa. She's like, you want a drink? Yeah.
But, it's kind of like, and because they went too far into two extremes here, where if they made them a bit closer and maybe dressed them, one a bit more provocative, but one less provocative, but in the same kind of style.
Yeah.
I think it wouldn't have been as, predictable as it was.
I mean, I also think, though, the ending to it, too, wasn't Trilogy of Terror. It wasn't terrifying. It was more sad. Like, she like offed herself, that's more, it's not like something where she went crazy and the other alter ego, the Vanessa, was the one who stayed there, and she ends up killing the counselor or whoever, her therapist. Like, that would have been a little bit like, oh crap, like what happened? And then she's like, I'm free now, and I'm gonna go and I'm gonna do whatever the hell I want. That's a little bit, it ended sort of the other way.
But it also kind of made me chuckle a little bit, because I remember when we did, Murder by Death, and she goes, she died in this room. She was murdered. She goes, oh, what? She killed herself? No, that's a suicide. So no, she murdered her. She was murdered because she hated herself, and it kind of had that kind of feeling. It's like, okay.
Exactly, yeah.
It's like, oh, and it's like, how did she kill herself? Because at the front, it's like, she's putting everything together. So she's gonna put the voodoo doll in. So I think if they showed the whole ritual of her killing herself, might have been more interesting, maybe. Because because the thing is, she's dressed up in the hooker gear. So that means when she's up in her hooker gear, I'm going to call it hooker gear because of what she's wearing, and those white high heels that she's wearing are atrocious. They're the most ugliest shoes I've ever seen.
By the way, it's interesting in terms of Karen Black in that before she did this for Curtis, she's did 5 Easy Pieces, The Great Gatsby. We touched upon the fact that she already had an established major movie career. And then she did horror. Unlike a lot of the other actors who did horror first and then tried to use it as a springboard into other areas. Like Michael Landon was in I Was a Teenage Werewolf before he went into Bonanza. And, and of course could name it.
The overprotective, overbearing person of Little House on the Prairie.
Yeah, exactly.
The stories that came out from that.
And what's the angel? The
Highway to Heaven.
Highway to Heaven. But a number of Charles Bronson was in House of Wax in 1951.
Right.
When he went on to do his stuff.
To be the biggest vigilante ever.
Exactly. I love those.
When they end up, usually a horror film is on the downside of a career. Isn't that basically what they say? But in the 70s, that kind of changed, didn't it? I mean, Bette Davis definitely changed it for a while.
Bette Davis also.
Well, Bette Davis kind of switched to horror after no one would film her anymore until she did her career was on decline. Then she did Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. Of course, that boosted her career.
Same with Joan Bennett.
And then they were kind of like stuck in horror for a long time after that,
But my point is that it's usually that they start out in horror and then they try to branch out. So here was a case. Karen Black already had some major films, and so I think she really took a risk by going into horror.
Yeah.
But I think Dan Curtis wooed her literally into playing the role.
Well, imagine being able to play not one, not two, not three, but 4 characters and 4 very different, distinctive characters. So, and maybe the teacher was a little bit like the studious side of her second persona in the second one, but for the most part, she got to play 4 very fun, different characters.
Yeah, the whole movie was around her. She was the main character and everything.
And she thought
that's a big appeal.
Yeah,
but then she ended up doing Burnt Offerings, which I think hurt her. I think Burnt Offerings hurt her.
Yeah, I think Burnt Offerings hurt everyone, unfortunately.
I still can't understand that ending. I still don't understand what it was that was up in that attic. I have no idea.
Well,
the old lady,
if you want to hear our distaste about Burnt Offerings, listen to last week's episode. Yeah.
Was it a sled? Was it Red Rose?
Oh, yeah. It wasn't one of our favorites.
Didn't Betty Davis also do a picture towards the end? She had a red patch over her eye. I thought
that was the anniversary.
Oh, yeah, that's the anniversary.
That was the 60s.
We talked about that the other day. I mean, that to me is like, it's a great movie, but it's not a horror film. It's a biting black comedy. But she does have a patch over her eye because her son BB'd or air rifled her eyeball out when he was a child. But that was quite an unusual look for her. Definitely, I love Betty Davis.
It looked like she could have been in a James Bond film as in one of the new villains or something like that.
Well, she played Madame Sin. That was kind of like a James Bond movie. That was later, though. That was in the early 70s. But I wanted to say about the 70s horror films, they were attracting big stars, like Gregory Peck and Ellen Burstyn was a big major star at the time. So these movies were huge. They were huge at the box office. So it wasn't... Yeah, it wasn't such a step down then to do movies like that. But when they did movies where they had to play with a monster, then that was different.
Well, I was gonna say you want something different. Imagine the role that you're getting. Oh, great! I'm gonna play the seductress again. Oh, great! I'm gonna play the girlfriend again. Oh, great! I'm gonna play the matronly whatever again. Like these are the roles, and all of a sudden it's like, well, you're gonna play a matronly character, but then there's a vampire. What? There's a what? Oh my God! Okay, sure. Or there's a whatever.
But I think you also have to look. You also have to look at the history of horror in its whole as well, because basically what we had, you had the monsters and vampires that ran from the 50s to the 60s. By the 70s, all of a sudden, and then this is, mainly from the start of Rosemary's Baby, all of a sudden that horror is something that is actually real and it's actually coming to your home. And it's actually
I think that movie started it. That was a quality production all the way.
Yeah, but then that's when we did come out with The Exorcist, because Exorcist could happen to you. The Omen can happen to you. These things happen. So we were kind of leaving these mythical creatures to the back end, and in the foreground we're coming up with this new kind of horror. And then we also got to remember that we also have the birth of the drive-in horror films that were cutting edge. Around 1975, we also got Texas Chainsaw Massacre happening at this time. Yep. We had Last House on the Left, these hardcore, edgy things where it's normal everyday person getting caught up in this horrific thing that this can happen to you. And I think Trilogy of Terror kind of is bordering on these sort of things, and I think this is probably where this is why Amelia stands out the most, because you do have these kind of lukewarm stories in the beginning, though I think Julia works very, very well. Melissa and Teresa doesn't work as well. It's kind of predictable. Then we got Amelia, and I think the reason why Amelia happens is that keeps people in mind, because you do have the Zuni doll, but you also have lots of layers going on here. You have the Karen Black character, and basically she's in love with the guy, but she's indebted to her mom. You don't know what the story is here, but you can put the pieces together that basically what's happening is this is a woman who basically had to run away from home, but she's still tied to her mother no matter what she did. And she's on a short-term lease here when she's living in this flat, and she's going to go back to live with her mom, and she's trying to get a little bit of independence, and of course her mom's overbearing.
Yeah.
And I quite like that kind of story. This is what's going on behind the scenes, and I think this is what helps makes the story. And of course you have the horror of the
supernatural element. You kind of get the, how could you not empathize with someone who has to take care of someone, and she feels obligated to take care of her mother, and it's what look at the trope. We went and did Psycho, a boy who took care of his mother to the point to where it literally drove him insane. That trope, it's one of these things where we all can kind of relate to. When we get older, are we going to have to get taken care of, or are we going to have to take care of someone, right? And then what type of person you're going to be. And so when she immediately, that conversation that we're all listening in on, and you're hearing her go through that, you're just kind of like, oh, and she's just trying to have but mother, I'm just trying to have a life. And no, I didn't mean it that way. And and it's just, you kind of feel bad. You really feel bad for her. And then that sets it off. And then there's that supernatural element that is, oh my God, let her survive just so she can get laid. Let her survive. Yeah.
But another thing that's quite interesting about the story as well is that you have to also remember that what was going on in people's homes at this time in the late 60s and early 70s and mid 70s, and it carried on almost to the 80s, is that people were buying African artifact dolls as things to put in their houses, decorations. You had the macrame plant, the macrame plant holders that everyone was wearing, and everyone was going back to these ritual things. People had like African ritual sex dolls that basically would help vitality and all this other stuff. And so this is what's quite interesting about this, is that they were actually also tying this suburban myth that was actually going on in horror into this kind of story and stuff like that. So.
Very interesting.
So anyway, why don't we give our final thoughts? So John, why don't you give us our final thoughts on Trilogy of Terror?
I definitely want one of those Uni dolls. No, just kidding. It was just one of these, again, I completely missed the first and second short movies. I can't believe I just didn't remember them, but now I kind of see why, because there was no supernatural elements. There was definitely moments where it wasn't really terrifying. It wasn't a terror to me. It was just more of an interesting thing. I appreciate the perspective, the way it was shot. I really think that in 5 years from one movie to another, like this definitely holds a little bit more in the way it was shot, especially in the third one. But yeah, I definitely loved revisiting the last one a lot, because that was just something that I still to this day bring it up in weird ways with friends, and they're like, "What are you talking about?" I'm like, "Trilogy of Terror. Watch it. Look for the Zunu doll."
And compare the two. Which would you prefer, House of Dark Shadows or Trilogy of Terror?
Obviously, I'm going to say Trilogy of Terror. To mean my hands up. I feel bad in the sense of Dark Shadows. I just don't know the franchise. And I think had I known it more, I think I would have been able to very easily connect with the characters. And so it's like I say to anyone, if you're watching like Harry Potter and you've never read a book, you're going to be a little like, wait, what's going on? And who are these people and why? And so there's history there. And so maybe before you watch this film, maybe go and start watching the series and go back. And
I agree. And Amazon Prime has all of them on, one of our sponsors, Keith. So I think it's and the interesting thing, even about the 2012 movie, there are a small group of fans who, after watching the 2012 movie, made a leap and they started to watch the original show. And they liked the 2012 movie, but it was because it gave them an introduction. And I commend those fans that did that, because they were smart enough to say, well, there must be something beyond this, whatever it is,
Yeah.
Why the hell, and of course the film was not critically acclaimed. So they went to watch the original series and they fell in love with it. So John, you've got some homework to do. But,
a lot of homework to do. I mean, I pretty much will be, by the time I finish watching this series, I think I'll be the age of Barnabas, like real age of Barnabas.
Hopefully not.
You also have to. You also have to keep in mind that when the show was on the air, it was a phenomenon for kids our age.
Yeah.
It's not a phenomenon anymore. I mean, it was then. Everybody was talking about Dark Shadows. And
Well, I think it's
you'd
also
see-
because you had to get home and watch it, right? And now you can DVR and binge watch. So it's your watching habits have changed. So you can wait to watch something. Whereas when I remember as a kid, I would run home because I'm like, oh my God, I got to watch a show, and it's not because you couldn't record it, so you missed it if you didn't watch it.
Yeah, you couldn't record it. You couldn't even change the channel unless you got up and actually cranked the dial. But this whole thing about I ran home to watch Dark Shadows, now I could never understand that because I started in what they used to call junior high in the 8th grade, and I got home at 2. I got out of school at 2:30, so I got home at 3, and Dark Shadows didn't start till either 3:30 or 4 o'clock. So I had plenty of time. I could never understand these kids. They would have had to get out of school somewhere close to 4 o'clock in the afternoon to claim they ran home. I think that's kind of a fallacy. Did you run home, Tom?
When it started, I was in junior high school, and it was on at 3:30 before One Life to Live took the spot. So I was able to watch it back. But then when I went into high school, and I actually went to a high school where I got out at 4 o'clock, and I didn't get home till 20 after 4. So at that point, at that point, I was so pissed. At that point, Dark Shadows was on at 4 o'clock. I would catch the last 10 minutes of the episode. I actually went to a cousin of mine at the time, and I asked him to do me a favor and summarize the episodes for me because he was watching it, and he said, "Sure, $5 an episode." And
and basically, if it is like a soap opera, not much has happened. Like pretty much, usually things don't move that fast. And
Dark Shadows, there is a couple years there where their storylines were turning extremely fast.
Oh, okay, then that's good because I mean, I look at some soap operas now. I'll go back to like watch, General Hospital. I'm like, oh, these people are still in the same. They're still in the house. They're still locked and being held hostage. Yep, it's been 3 months. Let's see if we can wrap this up.
Yeah, no, the soap opera went through a major overhaul, I think about 1968, 69, and the storylines are going, it's like you missed 2 episodes, you're kind of like lost. It started moving very
fast.
fast.
1897 did that. 1897 was patterned after 1795, but they threw everything in but the kitchen sink, and it lasted for 8 months. That's a long time for a storyline to last. And in the end, the whole reason why he went to the past, Barnabas, was to find out why Quentin was possessing the children, and I don't think it was ever even revealed. Was it revealed?
Well, that's often what happens. I mean, you get these horrible storylines where you're watching something and you're waiting for the big payoff, and you're like, you were more invested in the relationships that were built from that than like I remember Days did that with this horrible storyline with the Demira's adopted kids where the mother was like a woman in white, and they played this whole thing out for months, right? And basically they play it out and they kill her off within like 2 episodes. I'm like, what the hell was that for? Why did you bring this character in just to kill them off? And it was like, oh, because it was a relationship more about the Blakes, who are now the Demiras, who are acting like him and being mean and cruel, and it was more about becoming Demiras and about them being the Blakes and their mother, what happened. It was more about that than it was about the storyline. I remember being pissed, being like, what the hell?
Well, if it makes you feel any better, and of course, Jonathan loved to tell the story, it got so complicated during the 1897 plot that the writers didn't remember what they were doing, and they went out to the fans on the street who hung around the studio and asked them the questions, and the fans had the answer. So the fans actually helped the writers to remember what the heck was going on. That's how bitter it got. That's how bitter.
So Tom, what's your final thoughts on Trilogy of Terror?
I haven't watched it since I was a kid. Amelia sticks out in my mind, basically because of the doll running around, and I'm also reading that the crew was cracking up. They actually did this through animation, and the crew was cracking up because the arms and the head kept falling off while they were trying to do the animation, and they had to put it back on, and it was so I like things like that. But I think that it was certainly a very interesting effort on Curtis's part. If you're going to ask me which one I preferred, I have to, of course, being a Dark Shadows fan, I have to say House of Dark Shadows because I was so in love with the show. However, if I ever watch Trilogy of Terror 2, which I would like to see. Especially Rod interests me from the standpoint that it kind of picks up where Amelia left off. I would definitely like to see that, to see if there's any enlargement or development of the episode. But it certainly was a good effort, and you can't deny that it established Karen Black as a cult horror film star.
And what about yourself, Rod? What are your final thoughts on Trilogy of Terror?
Well, they pretty much echo what Tom has been saying. I mean, I liked the Trilogy of Terror, but by then the bloom was off the rose as far as I was concerned with regard to Dan Curtis, because I noticed that there was always a sameness to the Dan Curtis things. Part of that being because he always used the same music guy, Robert Cobbett. I think he did the music for Trilogy of Terror, and Trilogy of Terror 2, I think is also done by him. And I think Night Stalker was also done by him. So there was I liked his music, but it was so tied in with Dark Shadows that I couldn't remove myself from it to watch something different, like Trilogy of Terror. I didn't watch it initially. I watched it on reruns. I've seen it maybe 3 or 4 times since then. I bought the video cassette, then I bought the DVD, which I haven't looked at in maybe 3 or 4 years. But I would say that the Zuni Warrior is the most memorable, plus it's the most notorious. You know, I mean, it's got a certain notoriety about it because it carried on the horror film tradition of the evil doll. You know, I mean, they're still doing that with Annabelle. And if you've ever seen an Annabelle movie, she does absolutely nothing but sit there. That's all she does in the movie. You never see her move. She never talks. She never makes a sound. She just looks like a horrible doll that supposedly was made as a collectible. With that, I laughed at that. And look at the Chucky, the Chucky episodes. That's just like a Zuni Warrior doll, a little toy that carries a knife and will kill you and has no compulsion about doing that. What I liked about Trilogy of Terror and the Zuni Warrior is that it was the fulfillment of a curse, basically. You know, she was supposed to keep that chain, which apparently was not wrapped tightly enough around this thing. It could have fallen apart any time, and whoever happens to be there is going to get killed. You know, it doesn't say how Karen Carpenter's. Karen. I'm calling her Karen Carpenter now. How Karen Black's character gets killed. You know, how does she get killed? I mean, you know, she's going to kill her mother, but how does she get killed?
Oh, you mean in the second one? Because I was going to say,
they're both dead.
She got killed. I can tell you how she died. She died because they didn't have enough money to bring her back for the sequel.
Or maybe it was the asphyxiation of the smoke that went inside of her. It eventually kicked in. It was like, well, fuck.
Yeah, that could be. I will tell you that Lisette. It just occurred to me that Lisette Anthony plays different parts in all 3 episodes of the remake.
So they did mimic it. Oh, okay.
Yeah, they mimicked it, and the second story I remember really well because I thought it was very eerily done, and but supposedly it was done before. See, Dan Curtis regurgitated a lot of his stuff. There was something called Dead of Night. Do you remember that? Done by Dan Curtis?
I didn't like it.
Does that have different stories in it?
Yes, it's also 3 stories, but it was. I just felt it was inferior to his other works.
Well, one of those stories about a boy that comes back to haunt his mother was in Dead of Night, and now he redid it for Trilogy of Terror 2.
Oh, okay.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
But of course, the one that everybody wants to see is the continuation of the Zuni Warrior, which I can't remember for the life of me how it ended, but it was very well done. I mean, except for the repeating of certain
I think it ends similar
scenes.
to the same way that the first one ends, or I think it possesses the other woman.
Well, what happens is, really, if you put yourself in the shoes of the heroine, if you want to call her that, is how am I supposed to deal with this thing? You know?
Yeah. Well, no, I think she ends up doing the same thing. I think she throws it into a crematory oven, and it does the same thing. I mean, I think it's literally the same thing, if I remember correctly.
Oh, you've seen it?
Yeah. I remember seeing the second one just because, again, for the same reason, I want to see this little Zunu, and it was the last story. I'm like, of course it's the last one because you have to watch the first 2 to get to the third one, you know.
Weren't they in a huge building where it was running around killing everybody?
It was a hospital.
Yeah.
Oh, it was a hospital. Okay, because I remember the guard gets killed.
Because that's where Karen Black's body was. It was in one of the black bags that you never see.
Yeah, you never see that, and the mother too. They're right at the apartment when it starts up, if I remember rightly, or they're outside. The ambulances are pulling away, and nobody knows what killed.
I'm
them.
not quite sure.
I thought wasn't the doll inside of her or something? Am I making that up? I thought the doll was inside of.
No, the doll is burnt. And
the doll has its
from
own
the
body
oven,
bag.
from the oven, and this doctor or lab technician or whatever, she's trying to peel off that was her mistake. She peels the burnt part off the doll, and at one point she has to shove it in a big vial of acid, and it looks like maybe that might be how it gets killed. I can't remember.
Oh,
it looks
because
like
the smoke from the acid, something burns it, and it basically comes back up in her face, and then she becomes
yes,
a doll. Yeah.
that's true. That you repeat that, and then her boyfriend is supposed to be coming there to pick her up.
Correct. Yeah.
And she's waiting.
With the sharp teeth, she's like, "Oh, look at my little dentures."
Yeah, I mean, I have to say that
So I like the movie.
Yeah,
I like the movie, the original, and I know that it's a classic, and I can see exactly why it's a classic. But House of Dark Shadows, I can't even compare the two because I have a really soft spot in my heart for that movie. I really love it. So, and I agree with all the guys what you said, but that doesn't affect me. I did notice a jump cut when Karlen goes to move toward David, which I thought was very odd.
Right.
It just cut it, and then all of a sudden he's running in where they're all eating. So it was exactly what you were saying. It was like
that was bad editing.
Yeah,
it was, and also bad editing when he attacks Karlen before he even bites her. He's got blood all over his fangs. That didn't make any sense. If you look at that scene.
By the way, I just want to mention very briefly, and I forgot when we were talking about Roger Davis's interview, and I'm not sure, I believe this is the final cut. While he was driving through L.A. and talking to me, we heard gunshots. There was apparently some kind of murder going on, and he drove right by it. He drove right by it, and you may hear this in the podcast, I'm not sure, but he'll say, "Oh, I just heard gunshots." And I'm like, he's just driving right by it,
Bless the USA. Hee-haw.
Yeah, L.A. though. L.A. gets a lot of that stuff.
I want to express my appreciation to Roger, who really, really has done a great job. And we did a more extended interview with him, which will be, of course, later on in the season when we do the retrospective. But thank you, Roger.
Now, as far as my final thoughts of Trilogy of Terror, I think Trilogy of Terror for me is a very strong. I think it shows Dan Curtis has learned some lessons in directing because I think it's quite solidly directed. I quite like two of the stories a lot. I think the second one, like you do find in anthologies, is a bit weak. But overall, I quite like Trilogy of Terror. I think we got, quite a strong script with some strong acting going on, and it's very well edited, and overall I found it more satisfying and I prefer that over House of Dark Shadows. Though with House of Dark Shadows, I think the cinematography in House of Dark Shadows is very beautiful, and it was good to see some of my favorite characters come to life on the big screen. But personally, as stated before, I probably would have liked something a bit more cohesive as far as story goes. So I was a bit let down. But overall, Trilogy of Terror is one of my favorites.
So I think we're going along party lines here. The Dark Shadows fans are going to like House of Dark Shadows. And those
Trilogy are going to go to Trilogy.
Right.
And wait for a trilogy. Wait for a trilogy of Trilogy.
Has Trilogy been released on DVD in the UK?
Trilogy of Terror is available on Amazon Prime. It's also available on Netflix here in the UK. It's also available on DVD, and it's one of the only TV movies that's available on Blu-ray. Trilogy of Terror at the moment has so far made on Blu-ray sales a total of £20 million.
Wow.
Oh my.
That's crazy.
Surprise.
You walked into that question, that's for sure, Rod. You asked the right question.
Yeah, I had no idea.
So, John, do you want to finish this off now?
We covered a lot of ground today. Vampires, a Black Widow huntress, dual personalities, how to cook a ritual doll pot roast in under 5 minutes. But if you missed any of the very important topics we discussed today, you can head on over to our website at llpodcast.com to check out all of our past episodes, become a patron, and read our reviews of books to screens and everything in between. And if you sign up to our monthly newsletter, we will send you one of our precious Zuni dolls that will hunt you down in your very own home and possibly eat your soul and possess your body. Wait. I know we're out of those, so fear not, folks. We actually have an amazing Season 1 t-shirt that won't steal your soul. Well, maybe. Probably not. Okay, who knows, but you're going to love it. For our next podcast, we will be continuing our theme of the month, Out of the Mind of Curtis, where we will be reviewing Alfred Hitchcock's film Rear Window. As always, we'd like to thank you for downloading, liking, and sharing the Literary License podcast. To quote our Zuni doll friend, bye.
Oh, God.
Bye, folks.
We should also thank the cat, who I heard there was apparently a special guest. And
that's my cat.
Oh, okay. I think we should have Mom.
I have a Siamese. He meowed. I was going to feed him, and he meowed right into.
Mother, you should see what I'm getting for his birthday. It's a genuine Zuni fetish doll. I found it in a curio shop on 3rd Avenue. Arthur teaches anthropology, that's why I got it for him. It's a Zuni hunting fetish. It's really interesting. There's supposed to be some Zuni hunter's spirit inside of it. And there's a golden chain wrapped around it to keep the spirit from making the doll come to life. Come to life. It says, should the chain be removed, spirit and doll will become one living. Well, that's what it says on the scroll. The scroll. It comes with a doll inside the box. You should see his face, Mom. Mom?
These little drops of honesty too quickly tumbling out. And in the dark you think of me. Search for me in her mouth. So what's up now? The wind just blew right off my head. What you gonna do? Well, I can't sit here and that's a fact. Last night I dreamt I changed my name. Told me I was dead. But I was Jesus in your veins. At least that's what they said. So what's up now? You lost your mind. Can't seem to shake away this frown.
just got the weirdest idea. Yeah, what? I wonder what she looks like under all those clothes.